All right. Well, just before we get started, I want to give everyone a bit of a teaser about what we're going to cover today. So, today's not a demonstration. Everyone's going to be following along. So make sure you've got your laptop, obviously, in front of a computer if you're seeing this, and a mouse is really handy. So we're actually going to be going through some exercises today to get familiar with some of the typical production engineering tasks and questions that we want to be solving. So what we're going to be looking at are how do we calculate bottom hole flowing pressure? And not only how do we do that for one day, but how do we get the entire history of the bottom hole flowing pressure for a well? All right, how do we automate that? And how do we pick which bottom hole correlation is the most reliable? All right, we're going to be covering this. For wells on gas lift, we often have valves in the well, and we have the question, which valve is open? Are we injecting gas lift to the top valve or the bottom valve? So we'll be able to estimate which valve is actually open so we can diagnose that. For inflow and outflow curves, this is something we're going to spend some time on, and we're going to do sensitivities like what if we change the flowing pressure at the wellhead? What if we change the tubing size? What if we change the flow path? What if we change the gas lift rate? All these kinds of things. What if we change the choke size? So we're going to be looking at all these sorts of things together. Now, there's this thing called the gradient calculation, which is really just what is the pressure through the entire depth of the wellbore, so you can see what that pressure profile is. And from there, we want to ask the question, what is making up the pressure loss in the wellbore? Is it gravity or is it friction dominated? We can start to separate those two components about what's causing the pressure loss in our wellbore. This thing called a gas lift curve. Now, I only heard about this about 2 years ago, but it's probably been the most exciting thing in my nodal world in a long time. And so this is really the relationship about how much gas lift we're injecting to a well and what we expect the responding oil rate to be. And so the peak of this curve is basically the maximum oil rate we can get at any gas lift rate, but we may find that we're operating somewhere else on this curve. And once we create this for each well, we can actually quantify what oil uplift is available through a gas lift rate change. And so we're going to be doing this really quickly and finding opportunities to change our gas lift rate. Now, there's cases where wells are over injecting gas lift, and you might be thinking some of your wells are in that position. So we'll be able to show what does that look like on the gas lift curve. All right. Liquid loading. Of course, everyone cares about liquid loading. So we'll be able to see if and when our well has historically fallen below the critical lift rate and whether we have enough gas lift, if we do, to help us overcome that issue as well. So liquid loading is fine if you, like on the previous slide, we can manually look at it one well at a time to see if it's liquid loaded. We can also create a report card about which wells might be liquid loaded, which ones are below the critical rate, which ones are above the critical lift rate. And that gives us more of a screening tool on a mass scale to identify those wells. The same thing for wells that might be getting too little gas lift. We can create a report card and rank which wells have more opportunity, which wells are leaving more oil on the table if there's too little gas lift being injected into them. So again, more of a report card to find gas lift opportunities. Now, we're also going to touch on this topic, and this is kind of recent for this year, and this is about the topic of gas lift distribution. What I'm talking about is when you have a limited supply of gas lift available to share among many wells, we have the question, how much gas lift should I give each well? How should I distribute that limited gas lift supply? And so we developed this technique where it will automatically figure out how to distribute the gas lift among many wells with the goal of having the highest total oil rate. All right, we're going to look at how this works. And there's been quite a few operators who've been really exploring this and applying these recommendations to their field. And so there's going to be some presentations next year, some webinars and things that talk about their results of using this technique. So that's kind of a quick preview of what we're going to cover today. And we're all going to go through these exercises together so we can learn how to do it together. So my name is Graham Helfrich. I'm up in Calgary, and I've been at Whitson for about 2.5 years now. And it's been a lot of fun. I think most people on the call are Whitson partners, so I appreciate you joining us today. So a bit of a background here. So this course is going to be about 3 hours long. We're going to focus on getting through workflows together. We're not going to be covering a lot of theory today. If you're interested in the bottom hole pressure theory, there's a great recording in the slides. And again, we'll send these slides out again after. You probably got them again this morning, but that's a good place to learn about more of the theory. It's really easy to forget some of these steps. Let's imagine that you don't actually use the software until 2 weeks from now. If you want a refresher, there's something called the Nodal certificate, and this will actually walk you through every single step we're going to go through today at your own pace. There's animations, there's big descriptions, and so this is just a good refresher doing the Nodal certificate if you need a refresher, or if you've got a colleague who can join today. All right. So this is interactive. So there is a chat window, and we have other Whitson people on the call. So if there's something that's not working for you, if your screen doesn't look the same, or if you have a question, you can either speak up or you can just type the question in the chat window. Okay. All right. So just make sure you unmute yourself if you're going to speak. Okay. So one thing to really emphasize is the technical support that you get with Whitson. So our claim to fame is a 2-minute response time. And I'm not exaggerating that. So when you contact support with any question, we'll get back to you super quick. It's a real engineer who's contacting you. And the kinds of questions could be as simple as, hey, I'm a new user to the software. Can someone get me up and running? It could be as simple as, hey, where's that button Graham showed me on the course? Or it could even be, hey, I've analyzed a bunch of wells. I'd really appreciate someone just going through my interpretations with me to make sure I'm not missing anything. So those are the kinds of things that are included with your support. And again, it's probably the thing that we're the most obsessed, the most proud about. All right. So what we're going to start on here is we're going to start with a gas well, just to keep it simple and kind of get into things. And so we're going to say, how do we calculate the bottom hole pressures? Is the well liquid loaded? And we're going to use this method called the flowing material balance. And this used to be only something that reservoir engineers would use, but production engineers are using it now for this purpose, to find the current reservoir pressure. You know, when it comes to an IPR curve, reservoir pressure is one of the inputs for an IPR curve. And that doesn't mean the initial reservoir pressure, which might be 2 or 3 years old. We need the current average reservoir pressure. And the flow material balance is a way that we can actually estimate that without shutting the well in at all. So we're going to talk about how do we use that for production engineering. Our inflow and outflow curves, we're going to create that really quickly. We're going to compare things like flowing up the casing at a high wellhead pressure, lowering the wellhead pressure, and installing 2 7/8 or installing 2 7/8. How does that affect the rate? How does that affect liquid loading? So we're going to focus on this. We might even touch on chokes as well in this example. So this is kind of like a nice simple example to get us familiar with things. The second example we're all going to work through together is an oil well on gas lift. And so we're going to say what gas lift valve details are actually needed to take advantage of that information and estimate which valve is open, or calculate the bottom hole pressures, figure out which valve is actually open, do that flowing material balance to estimate the current reservoir pressure, make our IPR curve, and then ask the question, are we over injecting? Are we under injecting? What would happen if we changed the gas lift rate on this well? Okay, so these are the main 2 cases we're all going to workflow together, and these kind of cover most of the functionality and things that we want to do with production engineering in Whitson. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming around the corner in the development plans. And with that, we're pretty much ready to actually jump in the software. We're going to spend most of the time in the software working through cases together today. So with that, I'm just going to check if there's any questions before we get started here. All right, looks good. So what I want everyone to do is I want us to navigate to, I'll get back to my slides real quick, actually. Okay, so I want everyone to navigate to courses.whitson.com, courses.whitson.com. And when you get there, you're going to see this page, and the email you want to enter is the email that you registered for this course with. And then the password is just highlighted below here. So I'll give everyone a minute to get logged in. And we're going to be taking a break at the top of the hour, by the way. Now, if you're having trouble logging in, just write something in the chat window and we'll help get it sorted out, all right? So again, the email that you registered for the course with, and then the password is below here at courses.whitson.com. Okay, I think that should be enough time for everyone to have logged in again. Just type something in the chat window under Teams if there's any issues that you're having, all right? Okay, so I'll just get logged in here. Okay, now you guys probably are not going to see as many of these fields up here, but the one that we really care about is this one called Courses October 2025. That might be the only one you guys see. But this is the one we want to go to. It's called Nodal Courses, October 2025, and we're going to click on that. So once we're in here, we see a few what are called projects, and I don't know how this one's made. Someone must have been pretty eager and got in here early. So I'm just going to actually delete that one because we see no wells in there. All right, so the one that we want to focus on here is called Main. So again, under the field called Nodal Course October 2025, we're going to click on the project called, okay, now in Main, we have a gas well and we have an oil well. So we're going to start with the gas well. Go ahead and click on the row gas well. Before we start analyzing this well, we have to realize Whitson is a multi-user software platform, and that means that we are literally all looking at the exact same well. And the problem with that is we might end up stepping on each other's toes. If I go and do an interpretation, you might go in and override it or change it. And so how do we resolve that issue? Well, the answer is this drop down at the top called scenarios. You'll see at the very top, it says scenarios main. And what I want us to do is click on main and say scenario right here. Okay, so the drop down at the top under scenarios, say add new scenario, and just give it your name. Now we've got a lot of people on the call, so I might suggest putting in your either your nickname or your first name and your last initial, something like that. So a scenario is really like our own sandbox that you can play around, do your own interpretation, and it can be your own thing. Now you can either make it company-wide, which just means everyone else can see your scenario, or you could also have a private, which means you are the only one that can see that your scenario even exists. You can change the status of this later. For now, it doesn't matter whether it's private or company-wide, but once you've entered your name as the scenario name, you can click save. So again, just for anyone who's following along, we're going to go to the very top and go scenarios, add new scenario, your name, and then save. Now, let's see here. I'm not sure if I even saved mine. I have to double check. All right, so we see we've got a bunch of people who've added their own scenario here. That's great. And you should see that it has your name. It should say your name as the scenario. So now you have your own sandbox, and we're going to do your own independent work. One thing to mention, there's one thing that's common among all the scenarios, and that is the production history. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we're all working with the same production history for the well under each scenario. So that production history is consistent among everyone's scenario. Everything else can be unique to you, from PVT to which correlation you use to your Nodal Analysis, IPR, VLP stuff can be unique to you. So only the production history is common among the scenarios. All right, so on the left side, we see some different buttons: PVT, production data, decline curve, all this stuff. So the general workflow is top. Now, some of these steps are really for rate transient analysis. We're not going to be doing a lot of that today, so we're actually going to skip some of these steps, but we're going to find the general workflow is still top to bottom. Now, the first thing we want to click on is PVT on the left side, PVT. The reason we start with PVT is because it not only affects the wellbore calculations, it also affects any of the reservoir engineering that we're going to do. So we always do it first. Now, built into the Whitson software, there's actually an equation of state model built in. Other software I've used in the past, when it comes to PVT, they used to use like correlations for things like viscosity and compressibility, but Whitson, being kind of known as a PVT company, that's why you get an equation of state built in here. Now, this first well is just gas, and so it doesn't really flex the muscles of the equation of state very much, but we're going to find with the oil well that we do second, that's when we can start to see this equation of state really work for us. So under PVT, we're going to click on this little square box that we see right here under PVT. And once you click on that, it's asking us for a GOR. Now, this well has no oil. It's just a gas well, so there's no GOR. So what we're going to do is in this drop down where it says method GOR, we're going to change that to dry/wet gas. Okay, so the drop down under method GOR will change it to dry/wet gas, and we're going to input a specific gravity of 0.65 right there, 0.65, and then we'll click save. So we get this kind of boring gas phase envelope. We're not going to worry about this too much, but we're going to talk about this more once we get to the oil well, where it's more important. So that's it for PVT. We just put our specific gravity in for the gas well. Okay, on the left side, we're going to go one step down, production. So this is the plot of the well's entire production history. And we see along the x-axis, we have about 700 or so days of a bit of a tip, especially if you're using like a laptop monitor, is if you hit control, it'll kind of zoom out, or control plus and zoom in. And so I think you'll find if you're at about 80% or 90% zoom, control minus, control plus. That might make the plot scale seem a bit more natural where you can see everything. So if you haven't tried it yet, try control minus or control plus until you get to kind of a comfortable resolution, okay? All right, so the first thing I see is my time is in this cumulative time, but I like using calendar time, like dates, a little bit more. So in the very top left corner of the plot, it says dates, and we can click on the word way up on the top left, click on dates, and now we find that we're in dates. So that's just something that can be a bit more useful, right? Let's talk about the plot itself and the legend. So above the plot, we have a legend that says gas, water, casing pressure. If you toggle the word gas on and off, if you just click on it, that'll cause gas to show or to not show. Same thing if you click on the word water, you can toggle it on or off. And casing pressure, we can toggle casing pressure on and off. Now, the reason there's no tubing pressure for this well is there's no tubing installed in the wellbore. This gas well is only flowing up the casing, right? So that we're just at casing flow, that's it. When I look at the gas rate on the plot here, the gas rate's pretty flat here for a while. So 30 million cubic feet a day, flat rate. And then the gas rate starts to decline. And now we're down to about 7 million cubic feet a day. Okay, so that's kind of the history of our well here. What if we only want to show the gas rate, if we want to get rid of everything else? Well, I could slowly unclick everything, but there's actually a shortcut for us to show gas only. And the shortcut is to double click on gas in the legend. So like that. Now, if it didn't work for you, it means you need to double click quicker. Okay, so double click on the word gas in the legend, and that should cause only gas to be shown. Or if I double click on casing pressure, that will cause only casing pressure to be shown. So again, single click will toggle things on and off. Double clicking on that in the legend will cause only that to be shown. And you have to, this is a good practice for your how quick you can be with your double clicking, right? Okay, let's talk about zooming for a second. So the way I like to zoom is I literally just hold my cursor down on the plot and I draw a box and then I let go. And you could even do it again if you want. You can draw a box and you could let go. You could do it as many times as you want. You draw a box and you let go. But eventually you're going to find that you accidentally zoom in to somewhere where there's no data. And you're thinking, well, how do I get back to see my data? The answer is you just double click anywhere in the plot. You just double click anywhere in the plot and that's going to reset. We can try it again. We can zoom in, we can zoom in, we can zoom in. And if you don't like double clicking, there's an alternative thing. This little box in the top right says reset zoom, and that does the exact same thing as if you double clicked. All right. Okay, another way that you can control your axes and your scale is if you move your cursor up into the top left of the plot, where I am over here, you'll find if you get it in just the right place, you're going to get a double-headed arrow like I have here. Once you see the double-headed arrow, you hold your cursor down and you can drag, and then when you let go, it'll stay there. If you do it again, you move your cursor till you see a double-headed arrow, you hold your cursor down and you drag, it can go like that, all right? The same thing is true for the x-axis. So if we go down to the bottom right here, we see the double-headed arrow. We can hold our cursor down like that. You can do it again if you want. And then I'm just going to double click inside the plot and that'll reset my zoom, okay? So those are just some quick ways that we can control our plots. And the reason I spent time on that is because everything I talked about with the legend, with the dragging and zooming and things like that, with the scales on those apply to every single plot that you'll ever use in Whitson. So every plot is going to use the same sort of controls, all right? All right, let's go a couple steps down on the left side to bottom hole pressure. I'm clicking on bottom hole pressure, and we have this picture of a pump jack. What I want to do is navigate up to the little square box near the pump jack up here, and we'll click on that. So the first thing we see is there's a table at the bottom, and this is our deviation survey. So we have our MD and our TVD here. And if you're thinking, well, how do I get all this data into Whitson? Typically, if you have something like WellView or any sort of repository that has your wellbore description, like deviation survey, tubing size, stuff like that, we will connect to that through a Snowflake or an API connection to automate all of that wellbore data coming into Whitson. So that's what most of our partner companies are doing, is automating the import of all these wellbore details. And if that's not happening for you right now, just reach out to support@whitson.com, or you can reach out to me and we can have a meeting to set up and discuss how to get all that data automated in. And the same is true for the daily rates and pressures. You know, nobody wants to be using a spreadsheet for that kind of thing. So we can use an API connection or Snowflake or Databricks. And that's probably the most important thing, is to set up the automation of that data flow so it comes into Whitson. So just reach out to me or anyone at Whitson, and we will make sure we have a meeting to get that all set up. So here's our deviation survey. And if you want to see a little picture of the deviation survey, we've got this little curve icon above the table. If you click on that curve icon above the table, we see a little preview of that deviation survey. Okay, we can close that screen. Up in the very top right, it says well data up here. Now this is where we have details about our casing diameter, our tubing diameter, our tubing depth, our flow path, our artificial lift type. Now, in this case, the well is just flowing up the casing, and that's it. So we have our casing diameter. So this is really the most simple wellbore you can even imagine, right? We don't have any tubing, we don't have any artificial lift, and that's it. We're just flowing up the casing. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just get out of the screen. You can hit X or you can hit save, whatever you want. I just wanted to show you what this wellbore looks like and where that data is. We're ready to calculate our bottom hole pressures, right? We've got our wellbore description, we have our daily rates, we have our daily casing pressures. So let's click this big blue button. It says calculate bottom hole pressure. It should take only literally 1 second. I'm just going to click refresh on my browser, see if it shows up here.
Yeah, I'm checking here.
Let me make sure I didn't change anything in my wellbore. Oh, that looks good. I'm going to click calculate one more time, see if it, maybe if it has worked. What you should see is a plot of bottom hole pressures below this. Has anybody seen that in your software? Okay, I see. Looks like other people are seeing what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, we're fixing here, Graham.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Mo.
Seems, yeah, it's typically like 1 second. So sorry about that, guys, but I think we have a disconnection with the server that's doing the calculation. Just give us one minute.
Sure, no worries. Thanks, Mo. Maybe while we're waiting, I'll just be curious if anyone wants to ask any questions in the chat window. Is there anyone using jet pump? Yeah, I see a hand up, a couple. Okay, so jet pump is something that we just recently added to the Whitson software. So I think in my follow-up to the course today, I'll send out some information on the jet pump stuff, and we have some videos on it to show how it works and all that. Oh, sure. Yeah. So someone was asking about the PVT data. So what we did, and just to make sure we're in the same place, under projects, we're in the project called main, and then we're on the gas well. And then again, just make sure you're in your scenario, should be your name. But under PVT, we clicked on this little square button right up here. By default, it said method GOR. Well, that's more for oil wells or condensate wells. So we changed method from GOR to dry/wet gas. We typed in a specific gravity of 0.65 and then click save, and that was it. One thing I just want to emphasize is, how do you get support? How do you get someone from Whitson to give you a call, or how do you share the well or project that you're working on with them? So way up in the top right of the screen, you're going to see this little square box. It looks kind of like a voice bubble, and it says send to click feedback/question. It also mentions the email, so support@whitson.com. But if you just click on this button, this is where you can say, call me now, Nodal gas lift help, or whatever you want. Just give a description, type something in here, and just click save. And when you do that, literally every person at Whitson, including me, is going to get an email. The email that we're going to get is going to include your name. It's going to include all the details you put in here, but it's also going to include a link. It's going to include this link up here, and that's going to take us not only to the well that you're working on, but directly to the exact page that you're looking at when you click this button. Okay, and so that way we're going to probably send you a link for a Teams call to get on the phone with you within 2 minutes, and that means that we're looking at the exact same thing that you're looking at. All right, so that's kind of the cool thing about web-based software. You don't have to like save and attach a file. You literally just click this little, question or help button, describe what you need help with, click save, and within 2 minutes, you're going to get a response from a real engineer at Whitson, and we can see exactly what you're seeing. All right. Alternatively, if you decide to email, if you email support@whitson.com, I recommend just going ahead and copying the link that you happen to be on for your well, paste it in the email, and then we can see what you're working on at the same time as well. Something else to mention is there's a question mark symbol up in the top right, and it says user manual. If we click on this, it's going to take us to kind of like the help manual, the user manual for Whitson, and it actually takes us to the page that is related to wherever you happen to be in the software. So like we were under PVT, so it took us to the kind of the PVT section of the manual. Or if we were under bottom hole pressures and we click on the question mark, it would take us to the bottom hole pressure calculations part of the manual. And this is really, it's like a textbook. Okay, so everything, all the theory is included here, including, like I mentioned, if I type in the word jet pump, it'll take us to the jet pump piece of the software, ESPs, all this kind of stuff. And I had mentioned about the certification. This is again where if you need a refresher, to kind of get up to speed or reminder about all the steps that we're going to cover today. These certifications are here for Nodal Analysis, for RTA, for decline type wall, for defit analysis, all this stuff. So honestly, the certification is how I learned the software 2 years ago, and it was a really good foundation. How are we looking there, Mo?
Yes, sir. So it's we're still trying to fix it.
No worries, thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, let me see.
One thing I'll mention is, do we have any Snap users? Snap is oh, sorry, someone asked, can I repeat where the certification is? Yes. So in the Whitson software, you're going to find a little question mark symbol up in the top right. That's the user manual, the question mark symbol. And once you're there, on the very far left side, you'll see there's something that says certification. It's near the top left. And in there's different topics. And the one we might be interested in is Nodal. So we actually give you 2 wells to analyze and walk through every single step, pretty much the steps that we're doing today, really. And that's where the certification is. And if you're interested later in getting certified on rate transient analysis or any of these other topics, those are separate certifications available in there as well. The cool thing about when you finish the certificate and finish analyzing the wells, you'll actually send your results to us. And we'll look over them. We'll have a call with you to see if anything looks weird, looks good. We're basically giving you like the high five that you did it right. Okay, so I just wanted to mention about this product called Snap. So Snap is a totally separate nodal analysis software. I'm sure there's people on the call that use Snap. Back in August, Whitson acquired Snap. It's actually our first acquisition ever. So just for any of the Snap users out there, I want to make sure you know that Snap will continue. Okay, we're not canceling Snap. We're not ending Snap. Snap is going to continue, and you'll be able to continue using it, period. Okay. The reason we bought Snap is because some really cool technology, especially for like designing wells, designing artificial lift, things like that. And so we're gonna copy a couple of those really cool pieces of Snap, and we're gonna add them into Whitson to make Whitson better. So we don't necessarily have big plans to change Snap. People like it how it is. We're just going to continue developing this Whitson Plus software that we're learning today, and we might steal a couple of pieces out of Snap to help it do that. So perfect. That's just for anyone here who uses Snap as a bit of an FYI.
We should be back online now, Graham. And sorry, everyone. If you just refresh your browser,
sure.
Graham. Yeah, yep. There you go. And can you just show everyone if you like 2 things there, Graham, how to refresh, I guess, if you don't see the calculation. And even after you refresh, if the BHP calculation is not there, there's a specific trick to force the BHP calc. Do you remember?
Right.
Like just to show that, just within the well data settings there. Yeah.
You bet. So in your internet browser, what we want to do is we just want to click refresh or reload the page. For me, I'm using Chrome, so it's like this little like reload button there. Okay, so we should be seeing the BHP results here now. If they're not, just go ahead and click this calculate button again. And let's see, I think it's up nowhere.
If the button is grayed out, let's check that for the people who are saying that their button is grayed out. Just some people are saying the same. You just refresh your browser, you should see it. I think.
Yeah. So I just clicked refresh here, and there's also another little button way up in the top right. This is more like a hard refresh. That can work too. That little blue circle sign in the top right can be an alternative way.
I think for everyone who have it still, who say that it's still stuck, if you go and open the well data, Graham, can you show that? Just open well data, and then there's a way to force the refresh. Yeah, open the well data. Just click it there, Graham, and then in the top right where you have the settings button, like the gearbox. If you click on that one, then there's a button that's a bit hidden, but it's there, force run BHP calculation, and that will force the run to go through. Can you all try to do that if you don't have the results in front of you? If you do that, it should come through. Yeah.
I'm going to repeat those steps. So I'm going to repeat those steps.
Perfect.
So by the pump check, we have this little square box here, right there. This is normally where we see our wellbore details. And there's a gearbox up in the top right there. We'll click on the gearbox. And then at the top of the screen, there's a little circle button with an arrow on it. And we click that one time. Now, by the way, I've almost never had to do that. Like 99.9% of the time, this just appears. So this is probably the first time I haven't seen this run. It worked last night for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it was just a disconnect in the backend server. Sorry about that.
No worries. I did see. Okay.
Should be good now.
Yeah, I want to make sure. I want to see it, for some of the people who mentioned it was not working before. Can you just update via a comment in the chat window if you're seeing the BHP results now?
Yeah, they said that it worked.
I see a couple. Okay, I see some people say it's working. Yeah, I'll show you how to do that again. So by the pump jack symbol, we're going to click on the square box right here. And then in the very top right, there's a gear symbol. We'll click on the gear symbol. And then at the very top, there's kind of like an update refresh button here. It says force run BHP. We'll click on that right there.
Awesome.
And that should cause it to work. Mm-hmm.
That should cause it. I just want to actually give a little bit of context to people of why this button is there and it's super hidden. So basically, when you're running BHP calculations, like most of our clients, most of you guys actually that are on the call, you're running BHP calculations on a daily basis. And that means, you upload data for the day or for hourly data, for the last 24 hours. And then you calculate bottom hole pressure calculations for all that new data for, let's say you have 700 wells. And so the BHP calculation, the way it works, it only calculates for the new pieces of data that you have. So let's say you upload 2 new days, it will calculate those 2 new days. So it's a little bit of it tries to be smart, but what happens if the calculation gets stuck in the cloud, then it doesn't realize that it has to recalculate like the whole thing. And what you're doing there is just forcing the calculation. So it's a little bit hidden, but it's hidden on purpose because you're not supposed to be using it. And it's only needed if the calculation basically gets stuck. So I hope that explains it. And it should be, if you don't have it working now, just send us a message on the chat and we'll make sure to fix it.
I did see there was one question about Snap here. Okay, it says our understanding was that Snap license through Whitson is separate add-on. So yeah, so if you have Whitson Plus, it doesn't mean you're going to get free Snap. And if you have Snap, it doesn't mean you're going to get free Whitson. So Snap and Whitson are separate software products. I mean, Snap, you physically install it on your desktop. Whitson is a web-based software. So they're separate licenses. I'm just saying if you have Snap, we're not canceling Snap. Snap will exist as it has, and Whitson Plus will exist as its separate software. And that's it. All right, so we have the bottom hole flowing pressures here. So we've taken the casing pressure and we've converted it to bottom hole flowing pressures. And the question is, why are there different colors? Well, the reason is because we have different bottom hole correlations to calculate bottom hole pressure. Beggs and Brill, Hagedorn and Brown, gray, and this green one that you might have not heard about before, you can call it W and G, or it's Waltis-Mahat and Gahar. Pressure loss correlation has its own method to calculate the bottom hole pressure. These are called drift flux methods. And that's why there's a bit of a range of BHPs. And the question is, which bottom hole pressure is the best? Which one should I use, right? I was taught if you have dry gas, use gray. If you have lots of water, use Beggs and Brill. If you have oil, use Hagedorn and Brown. Those were kind of the generalities that I was taught. But about 2 years ago, we had the opportunity to a really big study here. And I'll just grab these results. So this is the paper. I'll actually send the paper out after the class. So we received permanent downhole pressure gauge data from 600 wells. And these are the operators who shared them. If you're joining the call, thank you. And from these 600 gauge wells with gauge data, we had 300,000 data points to use of pressure data, downhole pressure data. And so the question was, okay, we've got this great downhole gauge data. Let's see which correlations match the gauge pressure the best. And so I'm basically going to fast forward to the exciting results. Because there was a huge range of wells and reservoirs used, there was a big range of GORs. Some of the wells had very low GORs. Some of the wells had very high GORs. And so we bucketed all the data points from low GOR up to high GOR to see if that had an impact on how reliable the correlations were. Now, if Beggs and Brill perfectly matched the measured gauge pressure, then these blue dots would be along 0%. But in fact, Beggs and Brill overpredicted the bottom hole pressure by 16%, quite a bit. Gray had the opposite problem. It underpredicted the BHP by 12%, even in really gassy wells. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Hagedorn and Brown did pretty well. It was off by about only 5%. And this green one, Waltis-Mahat, it was also off by about 5%. So for me, these two correlations kind of won in terms of being closest to the measured gauge pressure. Now, there's an issue when we bucket by GOR. GOR ignores water, right? It's just gas and oil. So we did the exact same thing, but we bucketed the data points by gas liquid ratio to account for the water. And the results were pretty similar. Beggs and Brill over-predicted, Gray under-predicted. But we found with Hagedorn and Brown, it seemed to get worse compared to the gauge pressure as the gas-liquid ratio got higher, where the green one seemed to be pretty consistent at 5% error throughout the gas-liquid ratio range. So, for me, if I don't have any gauge data and I'm wondering which correlation to use, I'm personally using the W and G one, again, unless I have some other information available. So these are just off-the-shelf bottom hole pressure loss correlations. They're not tuned or calibrated. This is just how they come. And so this was a really interesting study for me because, again, we had all this great data and I think we put it to good use. So I'll make sure to send out this paper after the course. All right. So I want to use the green correlation in this case. So up in the very top of the screen, you're going to see a drop down. It says bottom hole pressure to be used in calculations. And let's all pick the Waldesmat and Gahar one, the W and G one. So we're using the same one. All right. Is the well liquid loaded? So under the pump jack, there's a little button that says liquid loading plot. We'll click on that. So the red line is the well's actual gas rate that it produced at. And the blue line is the Turner rate. So the minimum gas rate needed to avoid liquid loading according to Turner. Again, this well is just flowing up the casing. There's no tubing in the well. And so it was saying initially we needed 10 million cubic feet a day to avoid liquid loading. And more recently, we need around 7 million cubic feet a day in blue. So the point is this well has not been liquid loaded because the red line is above the blue line for most of its life. But lately, it looks like we might be getting ready to liquid load. Now, if you don't like Turner, there's a little drop down. You can change it to Coleman, change it to Nagu, Belfroid. These Nagu and Belfroids are just slightly more modern liquid loading estimation methods. They account for inclination. I found that they're very sensitive to the wellbore inclination, sometimes too sensitive. So I'm still sticking with Turner or Coleman here personally. One thing to mention is some people like to modify Turner and Coleman. And what I mean is if they find that Turner or Coleman don't predict what the liquid loading rate is, if they have field observations where the well loads up sooner or later, they may want to modify Turner rate. And so above the plot, you'll see a little blue water droplet. If we click on that, we have the option to add a critical rate multiplier. And this is really just, if you type in 1.1, that would basically change Turner by 10%. All right, or you could put 0.9 and it would reduce it by 10%. So this is just a way for you to change Turner or Coleman based on your field observations about when the well actually the liquid loads. Okay, I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to click out of there. Let's talk about erosional velocity for a second. So sometimes you've got such a high rate well that erosion is a concern, and usually it's at the wellhead. That's where the velocity is the fastest, is at the surface. Above the plot, it says erosional rate type. There's a little drop down, and we can pick it. We can pick the API 14E option. We click that and turn it on. Under erosional rate type, we see this orange line. So this is the rate that we have to start worrying about erosional velocity at the wellhead. But fortunately, we're well under it, so it's not a concern. But you may find if you've got some really high rate wells that you might be getting closer. Maybe you've even passed through that erosional rate. All right. Just as a comment, this other method, Svedman, this requires some sand details where the API method does not require sand information. Okay, so just an FYI. All right, so the well was not liquid loaded. Looks like we're going to liquid load soon. That's kind of what we learned so far. Yes.
Can you repeat the last step, Graham?
Yeah, for erosion, sure. So there's a little drop down above the plot that says erosional rate type. We can select API 14E. Orange line is showing us the rate that we'd have to worry about erosion, and that the fact that we're below it. So we don't have to worry about erosion for this well. We are just about ready to do our IPR curves. Now, quick question: Does anybody on the call have 3 pedals? I'm sure there's some people. So I used to have some manual cars. I don't have anymore. But what happens when we put our foot on the throttle of our car? Well, it usually connects to a wire. That wire goes under the hood, and what that wire is doing is it's opening a valve. It's called a throttle body. And this is letting more air into our motor, right? And it really depends on the position of our foot with how much air we're letting into the motor. So if we wanted to get really nerdy about it, we could basically make a relationship between the position of our throttle, meaning like a closed throttle where we're just idling, we're not making any horsepower, or if we were at full throttle, wide open throttle, how much horsepower we'll be making in that condition. And so there's a relationship between how open the throttle body is and how much horsepower the motor's making. Right? This is really similar to an IPR curve, but on an IPR curve, we're talking about the drawdown. Okay, so if we're not drawn down, meaning we're shut in, then we have zero rate. That's like the car's kind of turned off or idling. And the other end of the extreme is that we're at maximum drawdown, we're at our absolute open flow rate. That's what we're going to get. And so this line shows us the relationship between different drawdowns and what we can expect the rate to be at each drawdown. This is an IPR curve. Now, we don't always talk about it in terms of drawdown. We might talk in terms of what is the bottom hole flowing pressure. All right, it's the same thing. So if we're shut in, we don't have any rate, we have zero rate. Or if we're at our max drawdown, then we have our maximum rate. So this is an IPR curve. How do we calculate it for gas? Well, we use this very traditional technique. You might call this the C and N method. You might call it the back pressure equation. You might call it Rollin-Schellenhardt deliverability curve. But we're basically trying to figure out what will the gas rate be. The C value is kind of like the well's productivity. This is our average reservoir pressure. Notice I say average reservoir pressure, not initial pressure, but our current average reservoir pressure. This is the bottom hole flowing pressure, the flowing pressure down in the bottom of the wellbore. And then N, this is a turbulent factor. And we usually don't really know what this is, so we assume 1 typically. So the things that are in the brackets, this is basically our delta P. Our delta P across the perfs or across the sand face that's causing flow. How do we actually use field data to figure out our IPR curve? Well, first we have to tell the equation, what is the current reservoir pressure? In this case, 2,000 pounds. Then we tell the equation, what is our current 150,000 scuffs a day? Okay, that's an input. That's how the well's operating today. What's the current bottom hole flowing pressure? It is 1,200 pounds at the current rate. And basically between this average reservoir pressure and the current operating point, we can get the entire IPR. All right, this green dot is just like a sample condition how the well's operating today, and that is really useful in creating the entire IPR curve. Okay, we do make this a little bit more rigorous. We use a pseudo pressure as well, but it's all done in the back end. Okay, so let's get back in the software now. Before we go to our IPR curve, we need to answer that question: what is our current reservoir pressure? So I want everyone to go on the left side to where it says flowing material balance. Flowing material balance. Once we get there, we're going to click this blue run button, and we should see a result that looks something like this. So the flowing material balance's job is simply to tell us, is the tank, how big is the reservoir that we're draining from? And what I mean is it's going to actually estimate the original gas in place, the original oil in place. And we're not using any shut-ins, we're not using any buildups. It's only using the flowing pressure, the history of the well, the rates and the pressures that it's operated at. So this method was developed by Coterra, I think about 5 years ago or so, and this is how it works. So we have all of these data points plotted here. This is just our production data, rates and flowing pressures calculated in a different way. What we want to do is take this black line, and if you grab the black line in the middle, you can move it around, and if you grab the tips of the black line, you can change the slope. So what I want everyone to do is try to move the black line so it matches the slope, something like this. We're trying to find a shallow part of our data that we can. I'm matching it something like this. Now, once you've done that, you can see some results on the left. So it says contacted original gas in place, 23 BCF. You might have a little bit more, you might have a little bit less. I'm getting 23 BCF, 24 BCF, and it's all based on the slope of this line. Now, other wells might have a different slope. So if we grab the black line and we move it to be a bit steeper like that, that's suggesting we have a smaller reservoir, that we have less gas in place. In fact, I'm only getting about 11 or 12 BCF if my data were that slope. If the slope was more shallow, kind of like this, that's saying we're contacting more gas, we're contacting more oil, it's a bigger reservoir. I have 47 BCF based on this slope. Okay, so again, the flow material balance purpose is really just to tell us what is the contacted pore volume, how big is the tank that we're draining from without having to shut the well in. Now, as a bit of a shortcut here, there's a little thing that says auto fit. So if we see auto fit up here, we can click auto fit, and we can just pick the standard auto fit. I'll explain what these mean later, but under auto fit, we'll click standard auto fit, and it's going to do its best match. It gets about 23 BCF. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, what does this matter? How does this apply to production engineering? Let's click run one last time, and that's just going to update a plot that we're going to use. Okay, so if you've done auto fit, if you've clicked standard auto fit, go ahead and click run, and we're going to focus on this plot in the top right. It says pressure. It looks a little bit small, so let's expand it. So we've got this expand button. It looks like 4 arrows going in different directions. We'll click on that expand button, here by pressures, what we're seeing is the gray dots are the calculated bottom hole flowing pressure. Right? We took our casing pressure, we calculated them down to bottom hole pressures. That's where the black line is our average reservoir pressure. So back when the well was brand new, it had no depletion, it was brand new, we had around 4,400 pounds initial reservoir pressure. Time went on and we cumed some gas out of the well, our average reservoir pressure went down. And if you're wondering how is it figuring that out, that reservoir pressure out, well, we're saying that we know how big the tank was to start with. We're saying it was about 23 BCF. That's our original gas in place. So if we know how big the tank was to start with, and we know what the initial reservoir pressure was, we know how much we've cumed through time. And so just through a material balance calculation, we can figure out how much pressure is left in the well through its history. And we're saying that today I have around 1,700 pounds reservoir pressure. And if you guys go to the end of your black line, you should see something similar around 1,700 pounds current reservoir pressure. So this is the reservoir pressure we're going to use when we make our IPR curve. And that's why we touched on the flow material balance, because we want that current reservoir pressure. This is one of the really nice, convenient ways to get current reservoir pressure. All right. Gonna have a quick look if there's any questions in here. Okay, there's a question about the FMB. So let's say you're a geologist and you have a volumetric map and it says that you've got 40 BCF gas in place just stored in the pores volumetrically. When you do the flowing material balance, this is a totally independent way to estimate the contacted pore volume and the gas in place. What you're going to get for this volume is going to be than what your geologist says, because it's going to, the question is the completion, is the frac, is it going to contact every square inch of the volumetric reservoir that is mapped out? No, right? So this is really the contacted gas in place through the completion. And that's basically radiating and permeating through the pressure transient in the reservoir with time. And so this gas in place number is always going to be less than the kind of geological mapped floor volume. All right, let's skip forward at the very bottom here, nodal analysis. We're going to click on nodal analysis. I'm not seeing anything here. So, okay. So what we're going to do is, normally it should appear, but if you guys see this little circle, kind of recycle update button, you click on that one time and we should see our IPR VLP curve. Again, it wasn't here for some reason, but if you click on this little kind of update circle button, it should come in. Now you'll see that the red IPR curve, it goes and intersects on an average reservoir pressure of 1,700 PSI. And it says that number over here too. Where did it get that from? It got it from the previous step, right? We did that flow and material balance, figure out how big the tank is, figure out our current reservoir pressure, and that's what's used in the IPR curve, all right? The scale's a little bit squished for my liking. So what I want to do is in the top left corner of the plot, I'm going to move my mouse until I see the double-headed arrows like this. And I'm going to drag it up a little bit so I get a little bit more usable real estate. Again, I just moved my mouse till I see the double-headed arrows over here. And I just dragged it up so it's a bit more usable. So the red line is our IPR curve. What's the black dot? Well, the black dot is the well's current rate and current bottom hole flowing pressure. So by default, it just takes the most recent day of the well's history and says, this is the sample, this is how the well's operating today. That's a snapshot of what's happening. Now, any guesses what the black VLP means when it's solid versus when it's dashed? Okay, it has to do with liquid loading. So if we're on the solid part of the VLP, it means that we're above the Turner rate. And if we're on the dash part of the VLP, it means we're below the Turner rate or we're liquid loaded. So it looks like we're just about to liquid load, which is pretty consistent. When we looked at the liquid loading plot through time, it told us the same story that we're about to liquid load. Okay, so one thing just to mention before we do some sensitivities here is, this black dot, this is today's, but what if today's condition is not typical? What if there's some swing in the rate where it goes up or down recently and we're using that? Well, that may not really represent our well very well. You'll see these three little blue circles. They're above your plot here. Three little blue circles. If we click on that, we can say show points. So three little blue circles, show points. So what's happening here is these 10 dots are showing us the most recent 10 days of operating conditions. So not just one day, but 10 days, the most recent 10 days. What was the rate over the last 10 days? So, and we get this cool little plot showing up on the bottom left. The darkest dots are the most recent days, and the lightest dots are the oldest of the 10 days. And as you hover over these little circles, you can see on the plot where they're associated in real time over here. And so the risk of this is, depending which of these days that you picked, you might get a totally different IPR curve. All right. So in fact, if you go back to the 3 little blue dots, you can also show IPR curves. Okay, so the 3 little dots show IPR curves, and now you get this kind of scary realization that there's a huge range of potential IPR curves dependent on which day you pick to represent the well's productivity. So again, a little bit scary because it makes you realize that your IPR is so dependent sampled data point you pick to represent it, right? Okay, so what if we could just make an average of these? Well, don't worry, that's exactly what we did. So let's turn off the curve. I'm gonna turn off the show IPR curves. So the 3 little dots, I turned off show IPR curve, and then way up on the top of the screen, the top left, it says average IPR, average IPR. If we click that, it's going to update here. Okay, so the new black dot is now the average of these 10. Okay, so now the average lead us to a more reliable IPR. All right, so that's just something that's pretty new and that I find handy, just so we're not so dependent on maybe picking a weird day of history that could give us an over or an underestimate of our IPR. So again, I'm using the average IPR here. Just to clean things up, we can turn off all these little dots here. And so if we click on the 3 blue dots, we can turn off show points. So we're still using the average IPR, and things should look just like this. If you're wondering why does the orange dot not land on the black dot, it's simply due to the fact that when we do an average IPR and also the average VLP for the 10 days, those 2 averages don't necessarily land exactly on top of each other. It's just a reality, 2 averages being the average VLP and the average IPR, they don't always land exactly on top of each other. So this is normal, okay? All right, let's get this well out of its liquid loading problem. So let's say we have lots of compression available and we were able to lower the casing pressure for this well. Up in the top right, we're going to click on modify cases, way up here, modify cases. And we are close to a break, okay? Modify cases. So this table is where we can do different sensitivities on surface pressure, on tubing size, on flow path, on gas lift rate, on ESP depth, on ESP pump intake pressure, on choke size, all these kinds of things. And all we want to do here is we actually just want to lower the casing pressure. So we're currently at 1,000 pounds wellhead pressure. Let's type in 500 PSI in row 2 here. Now I want to take this water gas ratio and I'm just going to copy it. So I'm going to go Control C and Control V to paste it down here in row 2. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it lower casing head pressure, and then we can click save. All right, so renamed it 500 pounds, copy the water gas ratio. All right, so we should have a second VLP showing up in this purple line. So there's 2 benefits of lowering the wellhead pressure on this well. Benefit number 1 is we lower our bottom hole pressure, we get a much higher rate. All right, this well really benefits. It's very pressure sensitive, okay? So that's benefit number 1, increase our rate. The second benefit is we delay liquid loading, right? We're deep in the solid part of the VLP, where before we were very close to the dash line, which is liquid loading. Now you might notice that we were going to liquid load at 6.7 million, but now we can go all the way down to 4.8 million before we liquid load. Well, we didn't change the tubing size, so how is that possible? The answer is the velocity. When we lower the wellhead pressure, we lowered the bottom hole pressure as well. And when gas is under less pressure, that expansion is causing the gas to move faster. And that speed, that extra velocity by the gas being under less pressure is helpful to lift the liquids. And that's why we can operate at a lower rate before we have to liquid load at a low wellhead pressure compared to a higher wellhead pressure. All right, so that's one way to solve our liquid loading problem. But what if we can't lower the wellhead pressure? Well, then maybe we want to install some tubing. So up in the top right, we're going to say modify cases up here, and we're going to give the well some tubing. So up in the top right, we haven't been here before, but it says add/edit well configuration. We're going to click on this. Now there's a place to put a name right here. So I'm going to call it 2 7/8. Just give it a name. Now underneath our casing description, it says tubing data, and we need to give it some tubing data. So over on the far right, there's a blue plus symbol. And we're going to click that one time, and I'm going to type in a tubing depth of 6,500 feet. For our tubing diameter, we have these 3 little blue stacks. I think they look like pancakes. And we can click on this little icon over here. And this is our lookup table. So these are all the standard tubing casing sizes. And I want to use 2 7/8. And I'm going to scroll down to the 6.4 pound option. The 2 7/8, 6.4 pound. Once you find that row, you can click on it, the 6.4 pound one. Now, the last thing we have to do is say, what is our flow path? Are we flowing up the casing? Are we going to flow up the tubing? Are we going to flow up the annulus? Are we flowing up the tubing and the annulus at the same time? Well, we're just going to keep it simple. Tubing is our flow path. Okay, so if yours looks like mine, we enter the tubing depth, tubing diameter, flow path is set to tubing, then you can click save. So tubing is going to be row number 3. The very first thing we need to do, and by the way, I forget this a lot of the time, is there's a column way over on the right called configuration column. Down in row 3, we're going to change it to 2 7/8. This is the configuration that we just made, that we just described this tubing. So let's make sure we change it to that configuration in row 3. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this pressure from the casing. Yours might be a little different. I'm about 1,000 pounds. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. Okay, notice I pasted it under tubing pressure because we're flowing up the tubing now. I need to give it a tubing head pressure. For casing pressure, it doesn't even really matter because we're using the flowing side, meaning the tubing pressure, to calculate the bottom pressure. So you can either leave this cell blank or not, it doesn't matter, but we just need to give it a tubing pressure like this. Last thing is I'm going to copy that water gas ratio, Control C, Control V, and I might give it a name, 2 7/8, something like that. So if yours is looking like mine, you can go ahead and click save. All right, so I'm seeing here, I'll just change my resolution a little bit here. There we go. So I'm seeing a new VLP curve. Mine is yellow. Now, if you're not seeing this VLP curve, just make a comment in the chat window. Someone's going to give you a hand. This is showing the rate that we're going to expect if we put 2 7/8 in the well. All right, we're actually going to back the well a little bit because of the friction. The benefit is we can delay liquid loading all the way down to 1.4 million. So that's the benefit. Black VLP is how we're operating today. The purple one is if we just lower the casing pressure, and the yellow one is if we install 2 7/8. All right, we're going to do just one final last VLP before we take a break, and whoever answers first in the chat window gets to choose. So we can either put smaller tubing in 2 3/8, or we can flow up the annulus of the 2 7/8. Whoever answers first, we're going to pick that one. Annular flow, or okay, someone said 2 3/8, and by the way, someone said choke size, so we'll cover that too. Smaller. Okay. Ernest answered first. Okay, I see a couple, but Ernest answered first with 2 3/8 flow. So we're going to do smaller tubing, but I'll show you guys what annular flow looks like too. So back up to modify cases in the top right. Back up where it says add/edit well configuration. We'll type in 2, okay, under tubing data, we're going to hit depth 6,500 feet. Click on our little pancakes beside tubing data and 2 3/8. If you're feeling rebellious, you want to do annular flow, I'll let you do that. I'll show you how to do it. But I'm going to pick the 2 3/8, 4.6 pound. That's what I'm using, 4.6 pound for me. Okay, so this is where we can choose our own adventure, basically. So if you want to flow up the small tubing, you make your flow path as tubing right here. If you want to flow up the annulus, you pick annulus as the flow path. Okay, you guys can pick what you want to do. I'm going to pick tubing, but you can pick annulus if you want. All right, so if you've got your tubing described, your flow path picked as either tubing or annulus, you can say save in the bottom right. Step 1, pick your configuration. So under the configuration column, go ahead and pick whatever that new configuration is that you just saved. Mine is 2 3/8. I'm going to copy pressures and the water gas ratio from row 3, and I'm going to call it 2 3/8, and I'll click save. Okay, so I'm seeing that the yellow line is my big tubing, the blue line is my smaller tubing. With smaller tubing, there's more friction, so we have a higher bottom pressure. We delay liquid loading all the way down to 1.2 million, so that the smallest tubing allows us to remain unloaded the longest, but the compromise is we add more friction, so we back the well out. You know, for anyone who did the annular flow option, you probably find it might be a good option. In fact, you could do annular flow and then switch to tubing flow later. So you do all those sorts of sensitivities. I did see someone asked about chokes. I'm quickly going to demonstrate the choke process just so we can get our break going here. So for a choke, I go back up to modify cases. I go add edit well configuration in the top right. I'm going to type in a name. I'm going to call it wellhead choke. I'm going to give it a tubing size, same thing as we did before, 6,500 feet. I'll do 2 7/8. So the trick with chokes is flow path is going to be tubing, and there's a little option here. It says chokes. In the drop down, we can pick a wellhead choke, and it's just asking for a choke coefficient. We might not know this, so 0.75 is a pretty good starting point. So we just click save. We don't change anything in there. So again, we just have our tubing described, flow path is tubing, we pick choke. We're going to click save. Okay, I'm going to show you where we actually specify the choke size. So I'm going to pick my new configuration, which is called the wellhead choke. And we have this place to put a choke size. So if I use a 20/64, we can type it in. You could try different choke size, 32, 40, whatever you want. But there's something else to be aware of. So there's a column called line pressure. So in Whitson, we consider the line pressure to be downstream of the choke, and we consider the tubing pressure to be upstream of the choke. And so I want to give it a line pressure. This is the pressure on the choke outlet. Okay, so we're going to calculate through the choke inlet, then down the wellbore down to the reservoir. Okay, I'm trying a few different choke sizes here, 20, 32, 40. I'll keep my water gas ratio the same. Again, this will be recorded, so if this was a little bit too fast, I want to make sure we just get on our break here real quick. So I make sure all my configurations are wellhead choke, 3 different choke sizes, same line pressures, and save. We have so many cases here, it's kind of squishing my plot a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to clean some of this up. I've got so many, I'll just get this cleaned up so we can focus on the chokes here. Okay, so what we're seeing here is this is the biggest choke, 40/64, 30 seconds, 60/4, and 20/64. So we can kind of see the effect of the wellhead choke on the expected rate. Okay. All right. So it's about 10:30 Central Time right now. Let's have a 10-minute break. Let's get back at Central Time, and we're actually going to dive into an oil well. We're going to focus a lot on gas lift, and that's what we're going to cover next. So I'll see you guys in about 9 or 10 minutes, okay? We've got about 3 minutes left in our break, and then we'll get going again. All right, we're just going to get going again here. All right, now just before we dive into the oil well, I do want to explain how to create a liquid loading report card for many wells. Maybe I'll wait 1 more minute just in case people are getting back. I know someone asked about downhole chokes, and there was a screenshot added in the chat window, but it's very similar. So when you add a wellhead choke, you pick wellhead, but when you pick downhole choke, you need to specify the depth of the choke and the choke size right here. Okay, and so when you do that, you save it as a configuration, and you do specify the tubing pressure, because we're going to take the tubing pressure as an input, calculate the friction and gravity down the wellbore to the choke outlet. We'll calculate pressure across the downhole choke and then down all the way to the top perf. So with these inputs for choke sizes here are only for wellhead chokes. If you have a downhole choke, you need to specify the downhole choke size over here and save it as a unique configuration. So that's how that works. And the same thing is true if you have a downhole choke and you want to calculate all the historical bottom hole pressures through the downhole choke. You do the exact same sort of input, but you do it over under the BHP where you describe the existing wellbore. So just an FYI. All right, let's quite a quick report card about liquid loading for many wells. So I want everyone to go up to the top left where it says projects, okay, projects. And there's a project called multi-well liquid loading, and there's 27 wells in there. So we can click on multi-well liquid loading, and there's 27 wells in here. So what we want to do is check them all on. So there's a checkbox in the top left. We'll check them all on. Now, something I did before the course started is none of these wells had PVT. None of them had the BHPs calculated. And so what I did in advance is I clicked run, up here, run, and you can actually bulk run. A lot of these tasks, you can bulk run the PVT, bulk run the bottom hole pressure, bulk run the flow material balance, bulk run your IPR VLPs. You can bulk run a ton of this stuff for all your wells. So this is just like a shortcut if you want to save some time, you want to bulk run everything. You do it, pick the wells, you click run, and you run whatever task you want. So I did that already. What we want to do is go over till we find a tab at the top called results. Now, depending on your resolution, your results might look something like this, where it's kind of squished, it's over here, or it might look more like mine where it's in the top right. But we want to click on results at the top. And in here, there's 3 tabs at the top. We want to click on the liquid loading. For you might have everything turned on. There's way too many columns. So what I really want to focus on is let's uncheck everything with this little checkbox so it's all blank. And I'm going to turn on only well data, I'm going to turn on current gas rate. I'm going to turn on Turner critical rate, and I'm going to scroll down where it says compare liquid load MSA Turner under compare. And there's another one that says percentage. I'll turn that on too. So I've got about 5 columns turned on. Now to kind of sort these, there's a little drop down that says table sort by in the top right. And what I want to pick is the Turner percent in this sort by table. So sort by Turner percent. And this is creating a report about which wells are liquid loaded in red and which wells are not liquid loaded in green. And the number is showing us how low we are, how much we're missing the critical rate, or how much extra gas we would need to get over that Turner rate, and then what that means in terms of a percentage. So again, this is just a nice quick way at a field level to see which wells are liquid loaded. And it's not just using the most recent day, it's actually doing a 10-day average. And you can change this to whatever you want, but this is just a nice quick way to see which wells are liquid loaded at a glance. Okay. All right, let's do an oil well on gas lift. So back under projects, the very top left, projects, we're going to go back to the project called main project. And instead of the gas well, we're all going to click on the oil well this time. Now, again, how do we avoid stepping on each other's toes? We make our own scenario. So in the top under scenarios, we're going to say add new scenario. Some of you guys are already ahead of me. We're going to click add new scenario, call it our name. So that was under scenarios, add new scenario. Once you've done that, we're going to go all the way to the left side where it says PVT. PVT. In PVT, we're going to click on this little square box again, right up here. Now for wells, oil or condensate wells that are producing, we're going to see the GOR. Or if you have more of a condensate well and you like CGR, there's a little button here, but we don't need to click on it. This is an oil well. And we're seeing the first 100 days. That's what we're showing here. And you can move this horizontal bar up and down to try to see what the initial GOR is for the well. This is how we make the PVT work, how we initialize the PVT. We just look at the well's initial GOR. So I'm around, just to be consistent, why don't we type in like 280 scuffs per barrel. So pretty low GOR well. So we input the initial GOR, 280. We've got a reservoir temperature there, 25. We have the initial pressure. So those are the only three inputs that we need, at least as a minimum, get the PVT going. So 280 GOR, temperature and pressure are there. So if yours looks like mine, you can click save in the bottom right. So right now on the cloud, it just used the Peng-Robinson equation of state model in the background and use that to predict this phase envelope. So this is our initial pressure up here, 5,000 pounds, and it's predicting that our bubble point is around 1,400 pounds. Okay, now for this next step, you just have to watch. You don't have to copy me. Let's imagine that we had a much higher GOR well, like something like a gas condensate, where it's like 8,000 scuffs per barrel initial GOR. If that was the case, we get a very different phase envelope. So with a higher, more gas condensate style reservoir, we're really close to the dew point. Okay, so this equation of state model is really quick and handy for predicting our fluid behavior simply by entering the initial GOR. Now, there are some other options, like we're using this method where we just tell the well the GOR, right? That's probably the most popular way. But some other people, you might have good confidence in the API gravity or in the actual bubble point pressure. And so if you happen to really trust those numbers, you can pick different methods, or even if you have full fluid composition, you could enter that in as well. But we find the GOR method that we're using here is the most popular because it doesn't require anything else, just the initial GOR, right? So I think we're at 280, right? So this is what our phase envelope looks like that, right? Another quick little preview is there's an eyeball symbol near the top of the page here. And if you click on that, it actually predicts our fluid composition for us using the equation of state model. Near the top, there's another tab. It says PVT table, PVT table. Now this is where it produces our black oil tables. So viscosity, formation volume factor, all this kind of stuff. And so if for some reason you need a black oil table, this is where it exists. And in the top right, there's even an export. So if you click on export in the top right under PVT table, if you're using any of these other software and you need a PVT table, this is how you can get a direct export in the required format for these other software, okay? If you need a black oil table. All right, so our phase envelope PVT is done, all right? Let's click on the next tab on the left that says production data, We see in the timeline, we have about 250 days of production. It looks like there was a big shut-in here in the middle. I only want to look at oil. Well, how do we do that? We go to the legend and we double click really fast on oil in the legend. So the initial oil rate was around 1,300 barrels per day. And now we're down to about 400 barrels a day. We can see our gas rate, see our water rate, we see our tubing pressure, and we see our casing pressure as well. Now we can also turn on, we see our gas lift. Gas lift is reported here. It's kind of hidden in the background. So how do I only look at gas lift? Well, so in the legend, I double click on gas lift. And what I see is initially there was no gas lift. The well was just naturally flowing. And then we put a little bit of gas lift, like 50,000 scuffs a day. We later increased it to about 400,000 scuffs a day. And currently we're around 200,000 scuffs a day of gas lift for the well. And again, there was a big shut in here. That's why there's nothing reported in here, just a shut in. So that's kind of the history of this well's rate, under a year, less than a year of production. Okay, let's go down to the bottom hole pressure tab on the left side, bottom hole pressure. Now in this case, it looks like we've imported some gauge pressure. Okay, that's not every well has gauge pressure, but how could we use it? Well, maybe we could use it to figure out which correlation is closest to the gauge pressure. All right, so we've got our pump jack symbol up on the top, and we're going to click on the little square box here by the pump jack. We see our deviation survey below, and if we click on the little blue icon above the deviation survey, we see that this well is toe up. That's going to be important for later, okay? So this well is a little bit toe up. We can close that screen. And up in the top right, we'll click on well data, well data. What we see is this well has casing and this well has tubing. And initially, the well has no artificial lift, right? Gas lift didn't start for about 2 months after initial production. So initially there is no artificial lift. In the top left, we see configuration 1. That's what we're looking at. Configuration 2, if we click on it, this is when there was a change in the wellbore. And the particular change in this case was the well went on gas lift. So the reason we have these configuration changes is our wellbore will often change through its life. So maybe casing flow, then annular flow, then tubing flow, then an ESP, then gas lift. And so you can basically, any of these changes in the wellbore's flow path or artificial lift type through the well's history. So this kind of becomes like an archive of what did the wellbore look like through time. And the reason we need to do that is when we calculate the daily bottom hole pressure, we need to know what was the flow path that day or what was the artificial lift type during that time. And that's why we have changing wellbores through the well's history and describe them here. All right, so I'm in configuration 2. We see the artificial lift method is, let's talk about some of the other artificial lift methods. If we open that up, we have jet pump. And if you clicked on jet pump, we need to put a few things in, like are we using oil or water for the power fluid, nozzle diameter, a couple of little jet pump details. And I'll send a few more jet pump details out in the follow-up as well. We can close that. ESP. Okay, so if we have an ESP, what we're going to do is we're going to use the pump intake pressure. That's a great pressure source because it's so close to the bottom of the well usually. So pump intake pressure will basically come into our production history as a gauge data, as a pump intake pressure. It is important if you have an ESP that you specify the depth of the pump intake. The reason you need to specify the depth of the pump is because we're going to take that pump intake pressure, convert that pressure down to the pressure at the perforation, right? Usually the pump is not all the way down to the perf, but we want the downhole pressure all the way at the perfs. And so when we specify the pump depth, we will convert from that depth down to the pressure at the perfs. So that's why we need to put the depth of the pump. For rod pump, the problem with rod pump is we have this mechanical rod and this pump in the wellbore, and that makes using the tubing pressure a problem because the pump is blocking the pressure signal down to the reservoir. The pump's in the way. So with rod pump, typically we want to use the quiet side pressure, like the annular pressure, and then we would actually put a fluid level in. So through the production history, you're able to put in what the historical fluid level was. So it'll do a static gas pressure gradient down the quiet side to the fluid level. Then it'll do a single phase pressure calculation of the fluid level down to the end of tubing. And then from the end of tubing down to the perforations, it'll do a multi-phase calculation. So if you have rod pump, it can be helpful to have fluid levels to do the quiet side. Plunger lift is in here. I know a lot of people have plunger lift. So plunger lift really uses the same thing. If you have fluid level, you can use the quiet side, or if you want to use the tubing pressure to calculate the BHP, we recommend trying to sample the tubing pressure during the period where the plunger is rising, because that can give us the closest kind of representation to natural flow into a good pressure signal using the tubing pressure. We're actually working on a bit more of a rigorous way for plunger lift where we can do some averaging and get a better estimate of the bottom hole pressure using some averaging and things like that. So there's more coming for plunger lift, but the way it is now, we either use the quiet side with the fluid level, or we try to sample the tubing pressure during the period where the plunger is rising. If we click on gas lift, we're going to find that we have a couple options here beside gas lift. One of them is pour boy. Pour boy is where we're injecting down the annulus and all the gases coming up the tubing, or maybe you have reverse gas lift where you're injecting gas down the tubing and all the fluids are coming up the annulus. We support both methods. All right. So poor boy is pretty simple. Now, automatic is a really interesting technique. So this is where you have valves for gas lift, but you don't necessarily know what depths the valves are at. You don't know the surface open and close pressures for the valve. So what automatic does is it'll take the tubing pressure and it'll also take the casing pressure at the same time. It'll simultaneously calculate the pressure loss down the tubing. It'll also calculate the static pressure down the annulus, and it'll figure out at what depth in the wellbore are the pressures equal between the tubing and the annulus. And at that depth where the pressures are equal, it will say, well, there must be an open valve there at that depth where the pressures are equal. So again, automatic is a way to estimate where the open valve might be based on kind of like a pressure equilibrium at what depth the pressures are equal. So this is really a nice quick way if you want to avoid putting all the valve depths in to automatically estimate where a valve might be for gas lift. But the most rigorous way is to pick valves. And if you pick valves, then there's a little square box right here. And if we click on that, we see that we can enter our valve depth. These are the gas lift valve depths. And then we also need to enter the PSO, pressure surface open, pressure surface closed. So these inputs are going to use the historical casing pressure of the well. And based on the PSO, PSC, and the casing pressure, it'll figure out which of these valves or which of these pressure criteria are being met by the casing pressure to determine which valve is open historically. Okay, so we have 4 valves in this case, all right? So we can close that. We didn't change anything in here. I just want to give you a little bit of background about how this well is set up and some of those different options for describing the artificial lift that you have, okay? All right, I'm gonna click X in the top right up here, and we're going to say calculate bottom hole pressure. Okay. Does everyone have some bottom hole pressure showing up? I'm just going to check the chat window for a yes or no. Okay, yes, good. So that's how fast it works normally, really fast, right? So we see a bunch of different bottom hole pressures here. Now, remember, this well happens to have a downhole gauge in it, and that's what the black line is. That's the downhole gauge. In this case, the blue correlation, Beggs and Brill, happens to be closest to the gauge pressure. So already we might be able to lean towards one correlation versus another one based on which one is better matching the gauge pressure. But what if we wanted our correlation to even better match the gauge pressure? What if we could tune or modify the correlation against the gauge pressure? Let's do that. So way up in the top right, there's a button that says tuning. And if we click on tuning, we see the 4 different correlations here. And if I go to, let's say, Beggs and Brill, click on tune, we get a little pop-up. We're going to click yes. And right now it's modifying the correlation. It's modifying the liquid holdup and the friction factor in the correlation. And your numbers might be slightly different than mine. That's okay. So what's going on here? Well, down at the bottom, we can click on show fit at the bottom. So what we're seeing is that Whitson is basically trying to history match the correlation by modifying those two to make it match to the gauge pressure, like doing a history match. So if we close that little preview, we can see how it's modified that. So if we click save and we update the bottom hole pressures again, now we see mine kind of got a little, I don't know if it got better or worse, but this is how we can basically modify the correlation to try to match our gauge pressure a little bit better, all right? Now there is a way later, if you wanted to take those correlation modifiers and mass apply those tuning variables to many wells that maybe don't have gauges, that's something you can do as well. You can reach out to me later if you want to learn how to do that, okay? All right, so that's basically how we can compare these correlations and things like that. Now, the correlation I personally want to use, I'm gonna confess something. This gauge data it's fake. We just made it up so that we can show you the steps here. In fact, I still want to use the green correlation. And so in the very top, there's a drop down. Which correlation do we want to use? I still want to use the Walden-Spanton-Gahar one. It's the one I trust the most. And so we're going to use that. We're going to pick that in the drop down at the top, Walden-Spanton-Gahar. All right. So we're using the green one. One little note I want to mention here is there's a little icon up in the top right here. It says show wellbore configuration dates. It looks like a little box with a down arrow. If you click on that button, it's going to add vertical lines. And this is basically when the well went on gas lift. So if you remember in the wellbore description, we had configuration 1, which was natural flow, configuration 2, which is gas lift. So if you want to just visualize there was any wellbore change, turn that little button on or off, and you can visually see when there was a wellbore change. And this is, I find this helpful just to keep track of things and visualize things through time as the wellbore is changed. Next step, is the well liquid loaded? So under the pump jack, we'll click on liquid loading plot. Okay, so our total gas rate is in red and our turner rate. So I want you guys in the chat window to tell me, do you think, is this well liquid loaded or is the well not liquid loaded? Okay, so I saw someone say it is not. We have a couple different opinions. So this well is liquid loaded. So basically the blue line is the minimum gas rate needed to lift liquids from the end of tubing. But unfortunately, our total gas rate is lower than the blue line. So this well is liquid loaded. If the red line was above the blue line, then we would be above the turner or the critical lift rate. So this well is liquid loaded. Now, a lot of people are trying to add enough gas lift to overcome the liquid loading rate. And so really, for a well on gas lift, there's two sources of gas. We have the reservoir gas and we have the gas lift gas. And so up in the legend, we could turn on gas lift rate to see it as well here, okay? The bottom dashed line, this is the reservoir gas. Again, I turned on the gas lift rate in the legend. The next red line, which is thicker dashes, this is the gas from the gas lift. And then the top red line is the combination of reservoir gas plus gas lift. And even with those combined, we're still not above the turner rate, okay? Now, just an alternative would be a well that looks like this. Okay, so what we're seeing, the bottom red line is the reservoir gas. With the help of gas lift, the total gas rate is the top line. And so we don't have enough reservoir gas to be above the blue line. But when you add the gas lift gas, that combination of gas is above the blue line. So if you're wondering, do I have enough gas lift to overcome Turner or Coleman rate? This plot will let you answer that question. That in this case, not enough reservoir gas to achieve that, but when combined with the gas lift, our total gas rate above. This is just a visual example, okay? Okay, so this well is liquid loaded because we're below the blue line. There was a quick comment in the chat window which just was talking about the gauge data, and it is important when you have a gauge data that you actually do specify the depth of the gauge, okay? Because if the gauge is high or low, that's important when we are tuning the correlations to know what depth the gauge is. So we're tuning the correlation to the right depth as well. So just a comment, if you import gauge data, important to specify the depth here as well. Yeah. Okay, so we were on the liquid loading plot. The next tab over, beside liquid loading, says gas lift plot right here, and we'll click on that. Now there's a lot of stuff on this plot. The only thing I really care about are the blue dots. And so up in the legend, I'm going to very quickly double click. I'm going to double click really fast on gas lift valve depth in the legend. So what we're seeing is early on, the gas lift valve that was open was one of the upper valves. We're injecting pretty high for gas lift. But later, we're getting down to a lower valve. There was a big shut-in the middle. And now we're all the way down to the bottom valve. So that's what we want. We kind of expect to get down to a lower valve through time. How is it predicting that? Well, up in the top right of the plot here, there's this little 4-window pane, little icon right here. And this will give us a reminder about what those valve depths were and what the PSE, PSO pressures were. So it's really the historical casing pressure that is being used. It's looking at these PSO, PSCs, and it's determining, based on the casing pressure, which valve has been open through the well's history. And so that's really determining how these valve depths are being predicted through the well's history. Now, you guys can just watch this next step. You don't have to copy me, okay? So I'm going to pretend that I don't have gas lift valve depths. I'm just going to automatically a valve depth based on the casing and the tubing pressure and at what depth those pressures are equal in the wellbore. So if I use automatic, instead of specifying all the valve details, this depth through time is the prediction of which valve is open in the absence of actual gas lift valve details. So if you are missing the valve details, this is the kind of result that picking automatic would show you for an open valve depth. Okay, I'm going to change it back to valves so it's like you guys. So there we go. So we should all be the same, something like that. Okay. All right. So far we did the PVT. We looked at the history. We calculated the bottom hole pressures. We confirmed the well is liquid loaded. And we figured that we are on the bottom. All right, one last thing before we jump back into Nodal is I want us all to navigate under the pump jack to where it says BHP plot. This is just where we saw the historical BHPs. Initial reservoir pressure, right? Someone has input that the initial pressure is 5,650 pounds. What if we're not really sure about that? What if we want to double check the initial reservoir pressure? Well, there's actually a way to use this early time production data to estimate initial reservoir pressure. Above the plot, there's a icon, it looks just like this. It should be beside the green check mark. And it says estimate initial reservoir pressure. And if we click on that, what we're showing are the calculated bottom hole pressures and what the oil rate is for the first 10 days of production, just the first 10 days. So we see these 10 dots showing the 10 days of BHP and the associated oil rate. Now, if you click on the auto fit button in the top left, it's going to try to draw a trend line through those first 10 days of rate and BHP. And the idea with this is if you take this line and you point it all the way back to where it hits the 0 rate, basically on the y-intercept here, this is a potential way to estimate the initial reservoir pressure in the absence of like if you have a defit, that's a good method, but this is just a quick way to estimate initial reservoir pressure just as an FYI. So I find a lot of people like using this if they are not sure about the initial reservoir pressure. We don't have to click save, we can just click X. If you accidentally click save, just go ahead and type in this same number here, 5650 for the initial pressure. All right. We need to make our IPR curve, but remember, we want to know the current reservoir pressure. How do we calculate that? The current reservoir pressure, it's under the flowing material balance. So let's go down to flowing material balance. We're going to click run. And I want everybody to go ahead and try to make your own match of the black line on the slope of the blue dots. We can all make our own. Okay. Now for my match, I'm saying that I'm contacting about 2.9, almost 3 million barrels of oil in place. That's what the slope of this line is telling me. That's saying how big the tank is, how much oil I'm contacting, about 2.9 million barrels right here. You guys might have a slightly different number. That's fine. Once you get a match that's kind of like this, we're going to click run one last time, and that's going to basically update the pressure plot in the top right. So let's expand this pressure plot. So again, we have this little 4 arrows pointing out. We'll expand the pressure plot right here. So again, the gray dots are the calculated bottom hole flowing pressures, and the black line is the average. Now, in the chat window, does anybody see something that's a bit weird or a bit of a red flag when you look at this plot? Okay, I see BHP is greater than, there's some good comments there. So I think what people are seeing is that this flowing pressure, the flowing pressure in gray, is appearing to be higher than the average reservoir pressure. We need the reservoir pressure to always be higher than the flowing pressure. You know, again, this is basically the well was shut in, and then there was some flush production here. So, you know, a couple of reasons for this is maybe these bottom hole pressures are wrong. You know, I don't really have any reason to think that they're wrong, right? Unless we have some misreported water or something like that. I'm kind of trusting these calculated bottom hole pressures. But what I might be suspicious of is this average reservoir pressure. You know, it should be higher to be close or higher than these flowing pressure. This is actually a really good opportunity. This is a big clue that we might need to make the reservoir. If we have a bigger reservoir, it means we have more reservoir pressure remaining, which should make the reservoir pressure that we have left be higher. So the way that we can try to make that happen is we need to grab our black line. Okay, so if we change the slope of this black line to be a little bit steeper, and I'm going to try to maybe match it on this data down here, something like that. When I do that, I'm getting about before we had 3 million barrels of oil in place. But when I change the match to be a bit more shallow, we're increasing the reservoir from 3 to about 3.5 million barrels of oil in place. All right. And when I do that, we can click run. That'll update the pressure plot. So again, what I did is I had my earlier match and I changed the slope to be a bit more shallow. I get about 3.5 million barrels in place. I click run, that updates my pressure plot. And let's look at the pressure plot now. Okay, well, that is moving in the right direction. The black line, the average reservoir pressure is a bit higher now because we made the tank bigger. Now I only have about 3 flowing pressure data points above the black line. You know, do I need to move the black line a little bit higher? Maybe. So, you know, maybe I'll make the slope a little bit more shallow even. Again, this is a bit of an iterative process, but it's a good opportunity after that flush production to try to kind of qualify that match. And so, you know, now I'm around 3.7, 3.8 million barrels. Again, if you change the slope here, you'll get around somewhere 3.7, 3.8 million barrels, something like that. So if you're in the 3.7, 3.8 million barrel range, by changing the slope, you can click run one last time. And then if I go look at my pressure plot, okay, now I'm getting pretty close. So, you know, am I going to really worry about 1 day of flowing pressure that's above? I'm not too worried about that. I think I'm okay. I'm getting pretty close to what might be the reservoir size, about 3.8 million barrels. But what I really care about is the last black dot, which is my current reservoir pressure, around 3,000 or 3,100 psi. So we should all have around this number, 3,000 PSI is about the right number. And I will say, like, again, this technique, flowing material balances, it used to be used by reservoir engineers. And so if you're not quite sure about this, go ahead and reach out to Whitson for support or ask one of your reservoir engineers. Chances are they've probably already done this flow material balance analysis for you. And so this task has probably already been completed when you go and look at the well, by the way. So I'm gonna have a quick look at the chat window. How do you unzoom the flow material balance plot? What you do is you just double click. So if you just double click in the plot, it'll zoom out. That'll reset your zoom. Oh, can you reset? Yeah. Okay, I saw that double click. Cool. Thanks to the other Whitson people on the call. So again, if we've changed our slope so that our gas in place or oil in place is around 3.8 million barrels, and you click run, that should update the pressure plot. So my current reservoir pressure is around 3,000 or 3,100 PSI. Again, we want to use that for the IPR curve. All right, let's do that next. So let's go down to the bottom left where it says Nodal Analysis. Nodal Analysis. Well, wait a second. Okay, it should exist. So everyone should see the inflow outflow curve basically showing us our current operating condition for the well. If for some reason there's nothing appearing, you can click this little kind of refresh button right here. You shouldn't have to, but that's just if you need to. Okay. So this is how the well's operating now. We see that above we have our current casing pressure, our current tubing pressure, our current gas lift rate, which is 216,000 scuffs a day. This is how the well's operating. Could the well benefit from more gas lift? Let's answer that question right away. So up in the top right, modify cases. We're going to click on modify cases, and all we're going to do is I'm just going to copy the entire first row, Control C, and I'm going to paste it into row 2. I'm going to change the gas lift rate to 500,000 scuffs a day, and I'll give it a name. I might call it more gas lift, something like that. So once you've done that, you can click save, and we should see a second VLP curve here. Okay, so this is showing that if we add more gas lift, we are going to lower the bottom hole pressure, and we're going to see a rate increase. Okay, let's talk about, all right, so up in the very top of the plot here, right, we're on IPR VLP. Well, we're going to click on the one beside it called gradient. So what this is showing is it's showing the current conditions of the well, the current rate, the current surface pressure, the current gas lift rate, and the plot on the bottom left is showing us the TVD versus the calculated pressure in the wellbore. Now, I prefer measure depth, and so there's a little MD button. Let's click on that. Let's click on MD. So now we're showing measure depth versus calculated pressure in the wellbore. So again, at the top here, this is the wellhead pressure, what the pressure is through the wellbore, all the way to the heel, and then what the pressure is along the lateral, all the way to the toe of the well. Does anyone have any comments or guesses why the pressure is higher at the heel and lower at the toe? The pressure is highest at the heel and lower at the toe. Any guesses why it is like that? Toe up well. So this well is toe up. The highest pressure for this well is at the heel. And so it seems like there's about a pressure loss of about 1,600. There's only about 100 PSI pressure loss along the lateral. And I think the reason for that is because the gravity. There's very little GOR from this reservoir. And so the pressure loss in the lateral is mainly from the gravity because the toe is up high and the heel is down low. The weight of all that oil is basically accumulating from the toe all the way down to the heel. And so we have the highest pressure down to the heel just from the vertical change from the toe down to the heel. So that's why we have the highest pressure. Let's ask the question of how much is that gas lift really helping lower the bottom hole pressure if we add more gas lift? So we're going to go back to the tab at the top where it says IPR VLP, right? IPR VLP. And on the right, we have these two rows. The first row is how the well's operating now. The second row is if we add more gas lift. Way on the far right of this table, there's 3 little dots, and I'm on the second row. If we click on these 3 little dots, we can say send to, again, in the second row, send to gradient. We can say, yes, this name is fine. Let's save it. So now we can go back to our little gradient tab here. There's a couple things to note. The first of all, in the table here, with the current gas lift, our bottom hole pressure is around 1,700 pounds, but with more gas lift, our bottom hole pressure is 1,400 pounds. Great. More gas lift lowers the bottom hole pressure. And in the plot, we can see what the pressure profiles look like. And the black one is with very little gas lift, and the purple line is the pressure gradient through the wellbore with more gas lift, lower bottom hole pressure. The pressure drop in the wellbore is really 2 main components, friction and gravity. Those are the 2 causes of the pressure loss. What if we could quantify components that are causing the pressure loss? So in the top right by the table here, way up in the top right, we have 4 window pane. I'm in the first row. And if we click on that 4 window pane, this is chopping the wellbore up into pieces. And it's showing us, what's happening in the wellbore at every segment. Now for me, there's way too many columns here. And so I want to uncheck everything. I'm going to uncheck everything so it's blank. I'm going to use the little triangle button by depths, and I'm going to turn on measure depth. And I'm also going to turn on the triangle by pressure drops. And in there, I'm going to turn on friction cumulative drop and gravity cumulative drop. So this is the case, how the well is operating now, very low gas lift rate. And we see that down to 7,000 feet, friction is causing only 51 pounds of pressure loss, but gravity is causing almost 1,300 pounds of pressure loss. So we see that currently the pressure loss in the wellbore is dominated by gravity, or the density of the oil in the water. That's the dominant cause of the pressure loss, not friction. So we can close this screen, and let's go into the second row. The second row is where we added more gas lift, and let's go back to that little blue 4-window pane, but in the second row right here. Now, with more gas lift, our pressure loss from gravity is only 900 pounds. We've added a little bit of friction because of the gas lift. We've dramatically reduced the pressure loss from gravity because we're reducing the density of that heavy liquid in the wellbore. And so this is how we can kind of separate those two components. Why and how have we lowered the bottom hole pressure with more gas lift? You can see that we've improved the effects of gravity on the bottom hole pressure with more gas lift. Let's go back to the tab at the top, IPR VLP. And this is a case where we see this is how we're operating now. In black, purple is we have a little bit more gas lift. We would improve the rate. But the question is, what is the ideal gas lift rate? What if we added 550? If we went to 600, 700,000 scuffs a day? We'd have to do all these manual iterations to make different VLP curves. And I don't want to do that. So there's a shortcut. And it's this beautiful thing called the gas lift. Gas lift curve is what we're going to talk about now. So why do we add gas lift? Well, the reason is to reduce the density of that heavy liquid in the wellbore, to reduce that gravity effect, reducing the density. So if we compare how much gas lift we inject to what the bottom hole pressure is, if we have no gas lift, very low gas lift or none, we typically have a high bottom hole pressure because of how heavy the water in the oil is. But if we add a little bit of gas lift, we can reduce the bottom hole pressure, like we saw in this example. If we add more gas lift, we can reduce the bottom hole pressure more. And then if we add just the right amount of gas lift, we can have the lowest possible bottom hole pressure possible. If we keep adding more gas lift or over injecting, we actually make the bottom hole pressure go up. We don't want to do that. Why does that happen? Well, the reason is friction. Okay, if we're over injecting gas lift, all the gas we're injecting down the well has to come back up. And by adding too much gas lift, we add so much friction that we actually make the bottom hole pressure worse. Okay, so what we do is we take all these bottom hole pressure and we apply them to the IPR. And what that does is it will tell us what will the oil rate be at each bottom hole pressure. So the green line is the oil rate we can expect gas lift rates. That's what this gas lift curve is right here. So we can see that at the lowest possible bottom hole pressure from gas lift, that would associate to the highest possible oil rate we could get from the well. And if we're over injecting, then we're actually going to reduce our oil rate because of friction, okay? So how do we actually create this gas lift curve in Whitson? Well, we just go to the tab at the top where it says gas lift off, and we get this curve. It is created automatically for us. Now, what are we seeing here? Well, the X, this is how the well is operating now. The well is currently getting 200,000 scuffs a day of gas lift. So this is where we are now, is the peak of this curve. So this circle is the highest possible oil rate we could get at any gas lift rate, which turns out to be 1.1 million. That's how much gas lift we would need to inject to achieve 560 barrels a day, where we're only at 440 barrels a day with the current gas lift. So the difference between where we're operating today and where we could be operating is about 121 barrels a day. Now, you guys are going to get a slightly different number because we all have a slightly different IPR curve based on the reservoir pressure and things like that. But we can see that there's about 120 barrel a day uplift opportunity between where we are now and where we could be. Now, I don't think anyone would say that this is an economic place to operate because you can see the shape of the curve. We kind of start to have diminishing returns as the curve flattens out. So, I think in the future we might add some basic economics to find the more economic place to operate along the curve. But for now, it's showing us mechanically what the potential oil rate could be with more gas lift and where are we operating now. Now you see that this curve is dashed here and then solid here. You probably are already thinking, well, okay, that has to do something with liquid loading, right? The answer is yes. So if we wanted to have enough gas lift to get above the Turner rate, we would need to inject 550,000 scuffs a day. That's how much gas lift is needed to get above Turner rate for the well. So we're liquid loaded now, but we would not be liquid loaded if we were anywhere along the black line for a gas lift rate. So I think for some people, this might be the first time you've seen a gas lift curve. I know I only was introduced to it about 2 years ago. Other people, you might have used this a long time, but I think it's the coolest. So how can we kind of recreate some of these points along this gas lift curve back in the traditional IPR VLP format? Well, here are the two extremes for this curve. One extreme is to operate at this point, 1.1 million. The other extreme is if gas lift was turned off completely. So if we follow the x-axis all the way down to 0 gas lift, this is predicting that we still produce a little bit of oil, about 100 barrels a day, even if we turn gas lift off completely. Now that's not true for every well. Some wells might die, but in this particular well, it looks like we'd still get a little bit of oil even with gas lift at 0. So let's try to reproduce these two extremes, this point and this point, back on the IPR. So we'll go over to IPR VLP and we're going to go up to where it says modify cases up here in the top right. And I'm going to copy and paste one of these rows. I'm going to fill row 3 and row 4 in, just copying the numbers from above. And in row 3, I'm going to put 1100. That's about the amount of gas lift needed to reach the peak of the gas lift curve where we'd have the highest oil rate, 1.1 million. And the other extreme is 0. What if we have no gas lift? I might want to give these a name. I'll call this max, and the other case might be no gas lift, something like that. So if you guys have done that, you can click save. So all I'm changing here are the gas lift rates.
Hey, Graham, can I ask a question? If you go back to where you set up the cases, I noticed that you were showing gauge pressure. Is that because you chose a gauge? It doesn't come up for me on my current case, rated out. So curious about that difference.
Yeah, you know what? The gauge pressure is not even really being used in this case. The reason that's showing up is this well happens to have some gauge pressure in its production history, and so like if you look at this well's history, we've got our oil rate, we've got the casing, the tubing pressure, and we do have a gauge pressure here just as part of the well's production history. But I'm choosing to use the correlation in my case instead of the gauge pressure. So the gauge pressure is showing up here just because it is part of the well's history.
No, I get that. I mean, I've been using the same approach as you. I was just curious why it wasn't showing up on my end, even though I'm using the same correlation as you are.
Yeah, so yours is just blank here?
Yeah, the first one doesn't show up. The one on the current case.
Yeah, I'm not sure why.
But that's okay. Let's keep going. I don't want us to digress. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but it's
Yeah, I'll check here, everyone. I'll check and get back.
Yeah, so let's look at this plot. Oh, I'm going to change my scale here. Okay, so we've added 2 new VLPs. So again, the black line is the current condition of the well. The pink line is if we just randomly guess, well, what if I have 500,000 scuffs a day for gas lift? That's the purple line. The yellow line is if we inject 1.1 million. That's basically the peak of the gas lift curve is showing that if we inject 1.1 million, that would give us our peak oil rate. So if I keep injecting more than 1.1 million gas lift, we're actually going to be adding friction, and it's going to make our oil rate and our pressure. And so this yellow line is the absolute highest oil rate we can possibly get at any gas lift rate. So that's kind of like the extreme, right? The blue line is if we turn gas lift all the way down to 0, no gas lift, we'd almost kill the well, but we still get a little bit of liquid in the blue line. All right. So again, the gas lift curve is great, but if you ever want to just reproduce those conditions in this format with an IPR VLP, this is how you can do it with these different cases here. We're going to cover one more.
Graham, can we do an annular case really quick?
So for annular gas lift, what we would do is we go up to modify. Actually, let's do it on the gas lift curve. That might be more interesting. Okay. So I'm going to go to gas lift opt over here, and I'm going to scroll over to where it says modify cases right here. Again, I'm under gas lift opt, modify cases. I'm going to go to the top right where it says add/edit well configuration right here. And I'm going to call it annular gas lift. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my flow path from tubing to annulus like that. Do you want to keep the valves the same, or do you want to do a pour boy, or
same? I just want to see the difference.
Sure. We'll keep the valves the same here. Okay, so that's all we have to do is we just have to give it a name. We have to change our flow path from tubing to annulus, just like that. We'll say save. Now it's important in the drop down under configuration, we change it to annular gas lift. Now there's something I want to change here. I'm actually going to switch the casing pressure and tubing pressures with each other. Okay. I'll copy the same GOR and I'll call this annular gas lift. Okay. I just switched the tubing and casing pressures with each other for row 2. We'll say save. Okay, so what we're seeing is the black line is conventional gas lift, and the purple line is if we have reverse gas lift. So, because there's less friction in the annulus, this kind of over injection occurs at a higher gas lift rate compared to conventional gas lift. The peak oil rate with conventional gas lift is about 560 barrels a day, or with kind of reverse gas lift, we could get an extra 100 barrels a day using that format. Yeah, is that kind of what you'd expect? Okay, just a couple little tidbits before we take a break here again is, let's see here. So this is a quick illustration about how you can create different gas lift curves, injecting at different, and so if we are injecting at the top valve in black, our gas lift curve is represented in black here, meaning this may be our current operating condition, operating at the top valve, and the highest oil rate we could ever get is only like a little bit higher, basically going from here to here because we're only lifting from the top section. If we were to take our current gas lift rate, make it down to the next valve in green, our oil rate would go from here right up to here simply by injecting at a lower depth. And we also open the opportunity to add more gas lift and get up to here as well. So we can kind of get this like waterfall.
Are you pointing to another screen? Because
sorry, go ahead.
We're not able to see. Are you pointing to another screen, perhaps?
I'm so sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. I thought I was showing some slides. Oh, my camera's off too. You haven't been able to see my face. Okay.
This happened initially as well when you first went through the first example.
Okay, here I'll make sure I get this working this time here. Okay, can you see the slide now?
Oh, we see your desktop now.
Oh, like kind of like the PowerPoint, like presenter mode. You don't see like a full screen.
No, we see your desktop where it says LG switch not available when duplicate mode is in use.
Okay, pardon me.
And there's a background.
You saw the skeleton.
Oh, weird. Okay, let me. I think here. Let me just get rid of that little pop up. I don't know why that's happening. I'll just make a quick change. Just a sec. Okay, what do you guys see now?
Yeah, now we can see it. We can see
the
it.
PowerPoint in edit mode. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just do that for now. So, yeah. So this series of gas lift curves are showing that if we inject at like the top valve in black, what the associated gas curve looks like here. So this is where we may be operating today. The biggest improvement we could get if we only inject the top valve would be this point, where if we were to get down to this next valve in green, our oil rate would go from here right up to here simply by getting a lower injection depth. And so these different valve colors can be represented with different gas lift curves to show the benefit of either getting to a lower valve and what that improved oil rate would be, and then following the curve to see what the benefit of a higher gas lift rate would be at each valve. The other kind of thing to mention here is reservoirs with low natural GORs versus reservoirs with high GORs. They benefit differently from gas lift. And so the black line here is a well that has like a GOR of 0, basically no gas, just oil from the well. A well with a very, very, very low GOR benefits a lot from gas lift. And so that's why this curve is so steep like that. But alternatively, this purple line at the top, this is a well with a much higher GOR, like 1,000 scus per barrel. And that well has less benefit from gas lift because the reservoir gas is almost acting like a natural gas lift. And so you can start to see, based on your reservoir GOR, there are different benefits from gas lift. All right. we'll get back in the software here, and we'll do one quick thing, and then we'll take a break. I'll get my get the software shared again. All right, can you guys see the software screen here?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Okay, one last thing. Let's go back. Let's go up to the top left where it says, this time we're going to click on multi-well gas lift, multi-well gas lift. Okay, so I've got 11 wells here. They're on gas lift, and I want to answer the question. I want to rank the wells in order of opportunity, a gas lift rate change. And so we'll check all the wells on, and we'll go over to results. This is very similar to how we made the liquid loading report card. Okay, so all the wells are checked. We click on results, and we're going to toggle over past liquid loading over to gas lift optimizer. Are you guys seeing some numbers and stuff showing up? Okay, so there's too much stuff. So let's uncheck everything. I'm going to turn on well information view and well name. I'm going to turn on current oil rate. I'm going to turn on max oil rate and oil rate uplift. Okay, so I basically have these three things turned on here. And I'm also going to go down to liquid rate where it says, let's see, I'll make sure I have everything on here that I want. Yeah, current liquid rate, max liquid rate, and then I'm going to go down a little bit. It's just my resolution. There we go. And then under gas rate, we'll have, no, that's not what I want. I'm looking for, yeah, here we go. These ones here. Gas lift rate at max, current gas lift rate change. Okay, so I know that was probably, I probably went a little bit too fast, but these are the ones I have turned on. You can try to copy the things that I've got turned on the left. So the columns I really want to focus on here is current oil rate. So each well, this is what the current oil rate is. And every one of these wells has a gas lift curve created already. And so what it's showing is showing what the peak of each gas lift curve is. So it's saying even though this well's at 670 barrels a day now, it could be at 830 barrels a day with more gas lift. So that's a potential improvement of 150 barrels a day for this particular well. Well, how much extra gas lift would I need to achieve that? Well, I would need 1.4 million gas lift to achieve that. I'm only injecting 350,000 scuffs a day now, so that's a change of 1 million cubic feet a day I'd have to add in order to get a 150 barrel a day increase. All right, so this is basically ranking the wells, how much oil uplift is available through a gas lift rate change. And if you want to kind of QC these estimates, there's a shortcut. So like I'm in the first row, this well has the highest uplift available. So if I go way over to the left side, there's a blue button that you can click on in the first row. And that will take us directly to the gas lift curve, and it'll show us where we're operating now in the X and where the peak of the curve is, and that is the uplift available for that well. To get back to there's a shortcut up on the top right. It says gas lift opt results. We can click back on that. It'll take us back to the table, and then a well that has a very low opportunity for more gas lift, like the bottom one, we only get saying there's an extra 1 barrel a day available for more gas lift. We could check that one out by going to the blue shortcut, the bottom well. And this is showing us that we're already along the flat part of the curve, and there's really rate available through a gas lift rate change because we're kind of on the flat part of this gas lift curve. And then we could go back to that little results table. So again, this is just kind of a report card. It assumes we have infinite gas lift supply, and basically what would these wells give us in terms of a rate improvement if we had lots of gas lift, and how much would it take? So this is just a way to rank the opportunity for a rate change from gas lift. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. When we get back, what we're going to cover is this idea of gas lift distribution, which means you have a limited supply of gas lift, and you need to figure out how to distribute it to many wells to achieve the highest total oil rate among all those wells. Okay, and then we'll talk about some of the things that are coming in the future for production engineering and stuff like that. I think it's almost your lunchtime, so maybe we'll make this real quick. Let's just have a 5-minute break, and then I think we'll be done pretty quick after here. So I won't keep you guys for very much after your lunch. So let's get back at the top of the hour, and then we'll just wrap up real quick, and then we'll be on our way. Okay, guys? Just talk to you at the top of the hour. We'll just have a quick little break here. Okay?
Hey, Graham, I posted a question on the chat.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll repost it to get your thoughts on it while on the break.
I'll check it out here. Maybe I'll let Mo chime in. I think that was Ryan's question at the very end of the chat, and because I know it seems
correct. Yeah. So if you do that's good. That's a good point. So if you do annular gas lifts and valves, you basically will be injecting the valves are one-way valves, and the default setting for valves is that they flow from the annulus into the tubing. So if you're doing annular gas lift where you're flowing through the annulus and you actually want the valves to be used, you should use reversed valves. Otherwise, if you use annulus, if you pick the flow path to be annulus there with valves, what it will do, it will inject at the bottom of the tubing. It will always inject at the bottom of the tubing because the valves it will consider all the valves to be closed.
Okay, so if you want to do reverse gas lift and actually use the valves, you pick tubing and then reverse valves, and this will use the valves for reverse gas lift.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So this is like, otherwise it will, if you had annulus as the flow path and had valves, it will just inject at the bottom of the tubing.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and the reason we did it this way, and like there's two options for valves and reversed valves, was specifically because one of our customers requested that basically you would have, like, let's say you had a gas lift design that was designed to inject from the annulus into the tubing, more of a conventional gas lift, so you're flowing through the tubing, but you took that same design and you switched it around. They wanted the capability of that being kind of automatically set to flow through the bottom of the tubing like a pour boy, because none of the valves would work except if you have a valve open in your configuration, like a last valve always open, then that valve is going to be the one used for flowing.
Hey Juan, are you still on the call? I see your question here.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, so your question was, what if you want to design a well where you do not have production history, right? And you mentioned, could you use a numerical model, like a hypothetical reservoir model? So you could make a synthetic, numerical model, and then it would from that it would produce, a rate at a specified, flowing pressure, and you could use that as inputs to create the IPR as an example. That would be fine. Or you could also use analogous wells that do have history and pick, different points in other wells' history to sample the rates and pressures to design your new well as well.
Yeah, in this case, it's more of a sensitivity to decide how we want to get the well set up from the get-go.
Yeah, and the thing is, you might, like, what I might do is you might end up having like a range of IPRs based on some uncertainty. So what I might do is use the scenarios option. So like you could call it one scenario, you could call it like high IPR, and another scenario would be called like low RPR. And you could have the same VLP curves for different tubing sizes to see with those high or low IPR cases what the rate might be. Why don't we, I'll just wrap up here. I'll show just a couple more things, and then we can get you guys off to lunch for people who are in central time here. Okay, can you see the main slide? Is it working now here? Okay, so a quick case about over-injecting. It's for people who have lots of gas lift supply, I found that over-injection can be a real thing. So I want to show you a quick case about what over-injecting looks like. So this is a real well where it's been producing for about 2 years, and oil rate started at 800 barrels a day, down to 200 barrels a day. Reservoir gas was very high, almost 5 million a day, still at 2 million a day for reservoir gas. The GOR was pretty high, but it's even increased naturally just through time because we got below the bubble point, dew point. And so the amount of gas that was being injected was 1 million cubic feet a day, and they're still injecting a lot of gas lift on this well. And so when we took this well and said, well, is it liquid loaded? This is the reservoir gas, and the reservoir gas alone is above Turner. But when you add the gas lift on top of that, we're well beyond liquid loading. So liquid loading is not a concern with this well. Even just the reservoir gas is enough to support that. So that was a quick check. When we look at the IPR VLP, this is how the well's operating now, getting 700,000 scuffs a day of gas lift. And then so when we look at the gas lift curve, this is where the well's operating. And the peak of this curve is over here. So this is where it's operating now. This is the peak of the curve. And so what's funny is if you look on the y-axis here, the scale here, I really had to zoom in because this is 190 barrels a day, 194. This is basically only 1 barrel a day difference here. So what we're saying is they're over injecting, they're on the right side of the peak of the curve. And even if they turn gas lift all the way down to zero, the oil rate would not really change much, okay? Because basically this black line, even at zero gas lift, is still going to produce 190 barrels a day. So that's what the gas lift curve predicted. And then, what happened in practice? Well, once the operator saw this, they actually went to the field, they turned gas lift off completely. So on the left side here, this is when gas lift was happening and what the oil rate was. And then to the right, is when they turned gas lift off. So what happened is the oil rate, it temporarily jumped up and then it stabilized back at 200 barrels a day. So the predictions of gas lift turning off, having no negative result in the oil rate, turned out to be true. And then the gas rate from the reservoir, it actually doubled, and it kind of stayed up there for a while. And so basically they were just adding so much friction from the natural reservoir gas plus the gas lift that it was not helping the well at all. And so, you know, over the next few weeks, you know, the gas lift stayed off, but then the field guys turned it back on. And then they said, no, turn it off, and then went back on. So they're still working on communication, but this was just one random well among hundreds where there's an opportunity to lower the gas lift rate and either send it to wells that need it or just sell the gas down the pipeline. Now, the main reason this happens is because the GOR naturally increasing over the well's life, where when there's a low initial GOR, that's when gas lift might be necessary. But as the GOR increases, the need for gas lift becomes less and less. And so if you think that you might be over-injecting gas lift, that gas lift curve can just tell you yes or no right away by showing if you're to the right of the gas lift curve. Okay, all right. Let's talk about gas lift distribution. So this is really where you have a limited supply of gas lift, and you need to answer the question: how should I distribute that gas lift? Which wells should get how much gas lift so that I can have the highest total liquid rate possible? So I'm going to be showing you guys how this works here. So this is going to be more just for watching, just for the sake of time, but you're going to see all the steps required. So 11 wells on gas lift, okay? They're all here. And I'm going to go down to this thing that we haven't talked about before. And again, you guys can follow or you can just watch here, but there's this thing that says multi-well gas lift op. When I go there, I'm basically going to pick the wells that I want to share a gas lift supply. In this case, it's going to be all 11 of them. I can see that the combined gas lift that all these 11 wells are getting, the combined gas lift is about 3.2 million when you combine all the gas lift that they're getting right now. I've already made an IPR for each well because I want to make sure that the IPR seems, you know, reasonable, that I like the IPR. For now, I'm going to ignore liquid loading. So I'm basically just saying, take that total gas lift supply, figure a way if I could redistribute it differently among the wells, would that yield a higher oil rate? Okay, so I've just basically given the software some rules to say, hey, use the IPR that I made for each well manually and start crunching the numbers. So it's doing a bunch of math right now, a bunch of iterations to figure out how to distribute the gas lift among those 11 wells.
Can you just show how to get there again, Graham?
Sure. So under, I'm not expecting everyone to follow along here, but I went to projects, multi-well gas lift, and I went way down to multi-well gas lift op. It's quite far on the bottom on the left side, multi-well gas lift op. And then it looks like I have a few people following along. So in here, I said add multi-well gas lift optimizer, and all the wells are picked by default, which is fine. So at the bottom, I say add gas lift op. That'll just add these 11 wells. And in here, the thing I changed was under IPR VLP, I selected fetch from IPR, and on the right under rates and pressures, I also selected fetch from IPR. And then I also, under where it says turner rate, I just turned that off so it said none. And then I clicked continue in the top right. I'm just going to go find my find the one I made before here. Where's mine? Right here. Okay, so it takes 30 seconds or so to run. Okay, so there's a bunch of columns, but the ones I want to focus on are, it's trying to run again. I'll just wait a second. Okay, so there's a column that says oil rate. So this is the current oil rate each well's producing, and the total is about 1,500 barrels a day. There's a column that says optimized, and it's going to show 1,600 barrels a day. So there's a delta about 120 barrels a day between the current oil rate and what the higher oil rate could be if we redistribute the gas lift that we have. Okay, so the current gas lift each wells are getting here, and the optimized or the redistributed gas lift that it recommends that should be sent to each well is under the column called optimized gas lift here. So we're saying that if we just redistribute that limited total gas lift supply, we can have 118 barrel a day increase in oil rate. Now you see that some of these wells are going to see a reduction in their oil rate because effectively we're saying that we have to take some of the gas lift away from these wells and reduce it, causing a small oil rate drop in order to give other wells more gas lift. But the net benefit is 118 barrels a day. So like this first well is showing that it deserves more gas. We should go from 216 to 700,000 scuffs a day. And if we do that, we'll see 110 barrel a day increase on that particular well. Now I like to, again, scrutinize and check out the curve. And so if I go to that particular well, I can jump to it with this little blue link on the left. The X is where we're operating today. The dot is the peak of the curve, but we don't have enough gas lift to get there. And so the star is the recommended gas lift rate based on our limited supply. And that's how we get an increase on that particular well. Now, another well, let's say a well that has to give up some gas lift, like this well is going to lose 5 barrels a day by giving up some of its gas lift to a more deserving well. That particular well looks like this, where we're operating on the X. The recommended gas lift rate is the star. So this well is going to lose 5 barrels a day, so it can give up some of its gas to a well that's going to respond better. So this is how we can redistribute our gas lift supply to get more oil rate. Now you're probably already asking, well, Graham, are there some other sensitivities we can do? Yes. Well, what if we wanted to consider increasing our total gas lift rate from like 3.2 million to, let's say, 6 million? How would we distribute 6 million cubic feet a day of gas lift if we could add a little bit more? So I just type in the new total gas lift supply, 6 million, have it rerun. How would we distribute that much gas lift? Now remember, with only 3.2 million total gas lift, our delta oil was 118 barrels a day. That was the uplift available. But we see if we have 6 million to distribute, this column shows how we would distribute it, how much we recommend each well get of that 6 million. The uplift would be 200 barrels a day instead of 118. Okay, so you can test different total gas lift supplies to see both how it would distribute it and what the delta oil rate would be compared to how we're operating now.
Excuse me, where did you type the maximum gas?
You bet. So on the top left where it says initialize over here, this is kind of where we set up the rules and things like that. So where it says injection rates, there's a little drop down. So before, like initially we just used the last aggregation, but it says user defined aggregate, and that's where you can type in the total amount of gas lift that you want distributed. If you're worried about liquid loading, you can also add that as a bit of a criteria. So if you pick Turner and run this, it'll basically tell you if you have enough supply to unload all the wells or not, and then what the minimum gas lift rate would need to be for each well to get above Turner as well. So this Turner thing is kind of an optional criteria if you want it to be considered for this as well. So I think the important thing when you use this gas lift multi-well kind of optimizer is you want to first have a good handle of your IPR. So I like to just inspect each IPR first to make sure it's reasonable, because ultimately it's going to be used for a lot of these predictions. And then once you have comfort in that and you look at a few individual gas lift curves one at a time to kind of agree with them, that's when you can come here and start using this kind of distribution option and get these recommended gas lift rates and start applying them to the field. This was introduced about 6 months ago, and there's been a few operators who have really started using it and automating it and doing it every couple of weeks and then sending those recommended gas lift rates out to the field. And so I know we're going to be having some presentations from them in the future about what their process was and how the results compared to these predictions. So I'm really excited to see that as well. Any other questions about this gas lift distribution just before I talk very, very briefly about what's coming around the corner and what's coming? Any other questions about this gas lift distribution? It's really cool. And I know it's hopefully solving a lot of kind of the manual way of trying to do this in the past, right? Yeah, so one of the questions was just about, when you pick the IPR versus not. So with this option, when you pick with this IPR, if you pick this automatic option, there's a little tool tip. This will use the flow material balance if it's been done to get the current reservoir pressure, which will be used for the IPR. But if no flow material balance has been done, it'll use the initial reservoir pressure to make the IPR. If you've done a reservoir model, this is where it would use that to get the current reservoir pressure. So I personally use this fetch IPR option because I kind of like to QC the IPR for each well, just to see which data point it used for making the IPR. And then that's just kind of my comfort level to get the most reliable predictions.
But that would be the latest and greatest, right? Based on the well's history, using the current IPR, so to speak.
Not necessarily. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. So if I go look at one of these wells, I'll wait for it to pop up here. So if I've let's say I've created this average IPR option, right? Like I've created the average IPR, and I've even I say, okay, this is my IPR that I trust. It's basically saving this IPR and it's using that IPR when I pick this one. So not necessarily the one that from the most recent day of production, but it's using the one that I saved back when I was looking at the IPR, which in this case was the average.
Is that typically what you do, the average? Do you go for that one?
Yeah, I like using the average because I don't like using a single day because it might be an up or down period in the history. I should mention too, like I kind of illustrated when you have lots of wells, you can batch run PVT, you can batch run PVT, you can also batch run an average IPR. So you can basically perform this task in kind of like an automated instead of having to do it manually well by well. So I would do this first, and then I would go do the gas lift distribution second, and I would pick the IPR. I would pick the fetch IPR option, and then it would use the average IPR because I did that as a previous step, either manually or as in the run mode.
That's great. Thank you for the clarification.
I'll say, like, if anyone starts kind of going down this path with the multi-well gas lift thing, just reach out to me or support, and we'll just double check that things are set up good and properly, and then you can have more confidence in the process and the results as well. Because there's a few options in here, and we want to make sure that you're comfortable and understanding all the different options when you run this. Okay. So just real briefly here. So what's coming around the corner? Well, we know that an IPR curve is really just a moment in time, and something we've been asked for is, can you tell me what will the IPR look like in a month, in a year, in 2 years? And so we're probably going to be taking the numerical reservoir models that a lot of your reservoir engineers have already made for each well, and using those to generate future IPR curves. So that's coming around the corner for future development. And then also, helping you plan the entire wellbore life cycle. So taking the reservoir model that's been built and say, let's schedule an ESP, let's schedule a gas lift rate change to see how in time what that rate response will be. You can actually do this now, but the interface needs a little bit of improvement. So we're just going to revise this so it's a bit more user-friendly to do model forecasts with different wellhead constraints to different artificial lift scheduling. And then, when will the well liquid load? An IPR tells us what the rate will be for liquid loading, but it doesn't tell us when in the future that will happen. So this is something that's going to be coming hopefully in the next couple of months at the latest. Again, jet pumps are new and chokes are brand new. We kind of talked about that today. If you find that you don't touch the software for a couple of weeks, this Nodal certificate is a great way just to get refreshed with all the steps we did today. And we are going to send the recording out from today's class so you can see everything we did today if you want as well. And there's a couple different little videos about different case studies that operators have done, for ESPs, different automations of BHPs and things like that. So again, let's consider today like an introduction. And as you work through your own cases, just use that little button in the top to ask a question, or you send an email to support@whitson.com. And we're just here to help you to make sure that everything's working smooth and that you're happy with the results. So that's kind of it. Sorry I went a little bit over time. I apologize for that, but I appreciate the good interaction and questions people had. And if we didn't answer your question in the chat window, we'll get back to you on that, or again, just reach out to me personally if you want as well. So thanks to you guys, and thanks to the Whitson support team for being along today too.